Welcome to October 3rd,
Now I can hear you.
2022 ZBA. We have a continued meeting tonight. We have a far right, Luke Freudenberg, Sarah Silk, Suzanne Ryan, Vice Chair. I'm Audrey Klein, the Chair, Tim Cronin, the Clerk, Chuck Sumner, an alternate, and there's Kate McMahon, an alternate. And Sabette Stroman is an alternate. She recused herself from this case, but she is watching remotely. So I see the agenda is the special exception first, and the variance second, which I assume is the way that the applicant would like to go. So while you're doing that, let me go back to my little training statement. So there's two processes tonight. The special exception is a specific permitted land use that is allowed when clearly defined criteria and conditions contained in the ordinance are met. There's a separate chapter for that. Providing for special exceptions makes it possible to allow uses where they are reasonable in a uniform and controlled manner, but to prohibit them where the specific conditions cannot be met. Requirements in this sense are measurable qualifications that are the same at all times and places and can be expressed in specific terms. All special exceptions shall be made in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. I'm sorry. Tim, would you like to read the case in?
This is a continued public hearing for GMR Holdings of New Hampshire LLC and Wagon Wheel Trust, 1642 Center Street, tax map number 009-001, joint public hearing by Planning Board and Zoning Board of Adjustment for the special exception of case number 13-SE-22-175-161, a personal wireless facility, the variance for case number 14-V-22-175-164A2, height variance for a personal wireless facility.
Good evening.
Excuse me.
Oh,
I need to give the report for the viewing.
go right ahead. He looked at me, so I started talking.
9/25/22 Sunday, ZBA site viewing at 9 a.m. for GMR Holdings of New Hampshire LLC and Wagon Wheel Trust. There's a note that the balloon test was delayed to the backup date due to heavy winds on Saturday, the 24th. ZBA members present: Audrey Klein, Chair, Suzanne Ryan, Vice Chair, Tim Cronin, Clerk, Sarah M. Silk, and Luke Freudenberg. Note that Kate McMahon arrived later and viewed the vicinity but did not locate the group. Others present were Attorney Jonathan Springer, Victor Druin, GMR Holdings, Audra Klump, A&D Klump Environmental, LLC. The group assembled at the Evans residence and was shown by Victor Druin the approximate location of the access road where currently there are several pieces of heavy equipment parked. It was explained the road would be around the edge of the orchard, not through the middle of it. Audra Klum had erected the balloon earlier, which could be seen from the residence. She explained it would be airborne until noon. The group then walked to the base area of the proposed tower. Please note at this point, Sarah Silk was excused due to work obligation. She met a vehicle on the way down the drive and was later advised by the chair that it was Doug Breskin, a member of the Planning Board. Respectfully submitted, Sarah M. Silk.
Hi.
Hello. Good evening. Now can I? Good evening. My name again is John Springer from Springer Law in Portsmouth, representing the applicant GMR Holdings. I'm joined by Mr. Druin of GMR Holdings, Peter Cook, project manager for GMR Holdings, Audra Klum from Klum Environmental, and we have our RF engineer, Sohail Usmani, here as well. If I may, beforehand, or as a matter of housekeeping, I have hard copies of the visual study, and I don't know if everybody saw the email, but I'm going to hand them out. Thank you. We emailed them to
Thank you.
Mr. Austin on Friday.
Thank you.
And we're going to go through these in a little bit. Page by page. And then I also also have, I believe Ms. Ryan had asked for some further information about the wetlands on the property.
I believe I asked, but that's okay.
Okay, Ms. Klein, I'm sorry. So we obtained a letter from Ms. Klum. I have a stamped copy here, so I'm going to give this to Mr. Boston in the hopes that stamped version will go into the formal file, but I also have hard copies. And these are unstamped.
Thank you.
These were emailed to me before she could get the stamp on.
Thank you.
And again, we'll talk about this letter in a little more detail. In a few minutes. What I'd like to do tonight is give the factual basis for both the special exception and the variance, and then go through the legal criteria for both of those permits.
Excuse me a minute, so you're going to do both processes at the same time?
Well, I'd like to do one factual presentation for both permits, and then address whichever permit you want first.
Okay.
So, because I'll do it any way you want, but I think that's the most time-effective way. I mean, the same facts apply to both permits. So when I get through the facts, including I'm going to walk through the balloon test, I'm going to walk through the RF report, and when I get to the end of that process, then I'm happy to address whichever you want me to address first, the legal criteria for the special exception, and then the variance,
Okay.
or vice versa.
Thanks.
The property at issue is 1642 Center Street. It's a 73-acre parcel in the residential agricultural zone. The applicant is GMR Holdings of New Hampshire, Inc. We are seeking to construct a 160-foot monopole with the base equipment at the compound. The ordinance allows a new tower in the RA zone with a special exception, and that's section 175-161 of the ordinance. We are also seeking a height variance from 175-164A2. And I've put up on the board sheet Z1 of the site plans, which gives a good bird's eye view of the proposed location on the property. And I pointed it towards the board since there's no one else in the audience. But sheet Z1 shows Center Street, Route 28 is here. The access will come in off the existing driveway up to the house. And then, as previously noted, a driveway is going to be swinging around the orchard and the house. And it's going to be not dead center in the property, but we've situated it so it is set back from Center Street over 1,400 feet. From the house, it's 740 feet. From the property line to the west, 634 feet. The closest property line is, I guess, to the south there. It's 185 feet. As shown by the site walk, that's a pretty isolated location, if you will. And it's pretty clear that no one is going to be able to see the base equipment or the compound or the access. The utilities are going to follow the access in. And so to the extent that there are utilities going up there, which there are, no one's going to see that as well. We think in terms of location on the property itself, we think that's an excellent spot for those very reasons. We meet all the setbacks from the site or from the property lines. Sheet Z5, swing this around. Gives a good profile of the tower as well as a good bird's eye view of the compound in tight or in close. The compound itself is going to be fenced. It's 100 feet by 100 feet. This is an unmanned site, of course, so there's no water, no sewer. The only utilities are telephone and electric, which already exist up to the property. The tower itself will not be lit. The only traffic will be 1 or 2 trips per month per carrier. And so if this is a fully loaded tower with 4 carriers, which I'll talk about in a minute, you're talking maybe 5 to 10 trips per month maximum, and that's by a technician and basically a passenger vehicle or SUV to go up there and check the equipment. The only light will be over the equipment cabinets or equipment shelters, which are basically, and the lights are basically standard, household bulbs, 75 or 100 watt bulbs right over the top, so the technician can see what he or she is doing. There's no noise, smoke, fumes, other nuisance factors. The only, and I say no noise from the tower itself. The only noise will be from the generator. We are proposing an emergency generator. We put equipment specs in, which is Exhibit 5 to your packet. And the generator itself, when it's running, we submitted a noise chart, which quite frankly I got from the internet, but the noise level of this generator when running is equivalent to a vacuum at about 25 feet. And since we're nowhere near any property line, the noise from the generator is going to be very, very slight. And the generator is only going to kick in on 2 occasions, one during emergencies, when presumably a lot of people in town are going to be running generators, or during, I don't know if it's weekly or monthly testing, but as I said, I think earlier, we can program it so that the generator turns over during noontime on Tuesdays and not in the dead of night.
Excuse me, can I just check something?
Yeah.
You said 100 by 100 foot fence, and it says proposed Verizon Wireless 50 by 50.
Right, because that's the 100 by 100 is the compound itself.
Okay.
Verizon's only taking part of the compound. I'm going to talk about that in a sec, but that's exactly right. You read that correctly, and we were both correct. The profile of the tower shows at the top slots are going to be dedicated to town emergency responders. When I was on the site walk, I made the comment that it's pretty rare to have emergency responders at the top of the tower, and one of the board members said, well, no, it's really not. My point being, it's very rare that emergency responders get the top slot. A lot of times, virtually every other time I've ever done this, I can't say I've never seen that, but usually the towns get 10 feet below the lowest commercial spot on the tower. It's not very common at all that the towns go on the top of the tower, and in fact, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, when GMR first approached the town, GMR was looking at for 150 feet, and when the police and fire indicated they might need some space up there, GMR agreed to put them up at the top at 160 feet. But GMR is the tower company. It builds these sites, and it rents space on the tower to commercial carriers such as Verizon, T-Mobile, and we have a letter of intent from T-Mobile, and Verizon's already signed up. So there are 2 carriers who we expect to go on this tower very soon.
I think I'd like to reserve a question when we talk about the variance specifically and let you continue on.
Yeah, please, I reserve all your questions.
I think it's more applicable to the height.
Okay.
Variance.
All right. Okay, yeah. Okay. But what we've shown on this plan on sheet Z5, you'll see some rectangular shapes here, 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 and then at the top, dark or bold black. That represents Verizon's antennas, because those are the only antennas that are going to go up on the tower if we get our approvals right now. So you are, if you approve us, you would be approving installation of antennas there. The others are just to show that the tower has the room for these other carriers and will be able to structurally support the other carriers. This is a 4-carrier pole. It's designed, well, plus the emergency responders, but taking them out of the equation. This is designed as a 4-carrier pole. Getting back to Ms. Silk's question, if you look in the compound, you'll see some future carrier lease areas in light gray. And again, those are just showing that we have the space in the compound to accommodate these other carriers if and when they come to town. Actually, there's one set that's also in dark. That should have been in light gray. The Verizon equipment pad is down here with the generator. But that's why the compound itself is 100 by 100. Inside the compound will be smaller equipment cabinets and concrete pads. Again, generally, those can be 50 by 50. They can even be smaller. But that shows that this site can accommodate a total of 4 carriers. The monopole is a self-support tower. As I said, it will not be lit. There are no guy wires. It's not a lattice tower. It has a slim profile, which generally boards like. The color of the tower, again, we can talk about this in a little more detail, but we generally propose galvanized steel. I mean, it's like a brushed or matte finish. But if you want the tower painted, we can do it. But generally speaking, we feel that the best way is just, you know, the sort of the natural color. Why this site? Why this area? Verizon has identified in its plans a significant gap in coverage in the North Wolfeboro area. Their present on-air sites don't reach that area. And I can tell you, I can also perhaps address Ms. Ryan's why this height, because each carrier needs 10 feet of separation between the antennas, and that's measured from center line to center line. So if you look, the Verizon antennas have a center line of 150 feet. The next one down would have a center line of 140, 120, 130, and then down to 120.
Excuse me? I guess since you're still talking.
Yep.
I might as well get it out of
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I am concerned about the height, and specifically, well, maybe save it. You have on here another proposed town feature.
Yep.
And it's a public safety antenna.
Yep.
So why do you feel you need to give a safety antenna at the top and then at midway on the pole? Why 2?
Well, because the top spot's the best. The top spot is the best. And that, well, I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
It will have the biggest coverage footprint because it's highest and it will propagate further.
Understood.
Okay.
What is the radius of that?
We're going to get into that. We're going to get into that.
What, later or?
In about 5 minutes.
Okay.
That's what the RF report is.
Okay.
Okay, now, the other spot, it says future. At 100 feet, it's unlikely that any commercial carrier will want that spot. And Peter's itching to say something. Sorry, I didn't say it. Go ahead.
So,
Could you say who you are, although we
Peter
know?
Cook, project
Thank
manager
you.
for GMR Holdings. So we're showing 2 antenna locations for the town. One is the send antennas, the other are receive antennas. So the town engineers, the town's RF engineer for their two-way system requested two separated locations, one at the top and one down near the bottom. They like the town's radio frequency engineer for the town's two-way system. So this is a public safety for police and fire, as you know. So they will have two sets of antennas. They'll have the send antennas and they'll have receive antennas. So the way their technology works, they are better off when the send and receive are separated. So those two locations were requested by the town's radio frequency engineer.
Who was that?
Two-way communication.
It'll be a contractor.
Yeah, it's a fellow named Bill Bartlett, who is with Two-Way Communications. He is contracted with the town they do all their two-way communications for police and fire.
When was that?
When was what?
I didn't know we had someone contracted for that.
They always have for all the they've had them for many years. So because they will supply both the walkie-talkie, the radios, as well as they do the whole system. So the town has another tower in town as well that they have their equipment on. So they had a major hole in North Wolfeboro, and their antennas, their radio frequency plots are part of your package as well.
And so what area, I know you're going to answer this later, but what area does that top spot cover?
It would, yeah, you can do that.
All right.
Right.
Well, the reason that I make issue of it is because we could be at 150 feet if it could be located where the other town antenna is.
You could be, but why would you want to be, given the visual impacts
Well,
of this
because
tower?
I don't know where area it covers. And
Well, okay, we're going to talk about that, but I guess, well, okay. I think, taking one step back, Verizon has indicated that, and we're going to see its report, that there's a significant gap in coverage in this area. We feel that a lot of the people who live in that area feel the same way. We heard from one or two people last time. They didn't come out this time. We also understand some people may not necessarily agree with that. I would note, for the record, we have letters of support from both the police and fire department that should be in your packets. You should have received them. I have other copies if you want them. But by letter dated September 2nd, the fire department chief said that this will, quote, "This will improve our operations and increase the safety of our members operating under emergency conditions," end quote. And by letter dated September 7, the police chief said the tower, quote, "The tower placement is expected to improve emergency communications significantly. The improvements benefit our operations, Wolfeboro Central Dispatch, and our officers on patrol. We support the approval of this project," end quote. As part of your packet, Exhibit 2, we submitted the RF report. I hope everybody has a copy of that. I'm going to put a couple of the sheets up on the board. Now, as a general overview, and I would ask Mr. Usmani to correct me if I misstate anything, and certainly if you have technical questions that I can't answer, we will hear from Mr. Usmani. But the wireless technology is very popular. When I started doing this many, many years ago, I'd be in front of a board and no one had a phone, no one had a laptop, no one used wireless, and I used to get blank looks. Now I don't really have to belabor that point. It has many benefits: data transmission, speed, convenience. And when I started, it was just phones, and now it's phones, laptops, computers, the whole wireless spectrum. This is a line-of-sight technology. not literal line of sight, so you can be in your house and still get coverage, even if you can't see through your walls to see the tower. But it's a line of sight in the physics sense, so that the radio frequency waves have to be able to see the handset or your laptop, and the laptop or your handset have to be able to see the antennas as well. The radio frequency waves get blocked by hills, topography, buildings, trees. I've learned, and I was terrible at physics in high school, but I have since learned that pine trees especially block these because the length of the pine needles and the water content of the pine needles are such that the sine waves of the radio frequency waves get blocked especially well by pine trees. Go figure, pine needles. But in a best case scenario, without any, and all of that in the radio frequency world is called clutter. Trees, topography, buildings, things that block the waves are called clutter. In a perfect world, without any clutter, this, at maybe 150, 160 feet, you're talking maybe 4 to 5 miles in any one direction. It's not a lot. If you sat here and turned on a radio, you would get, and by the way, radio frequency waves are coming in this building even as we speak. If you can get a radio, that transmitter is what they call a boomer. That may be many, many, many miles off. You can't do that with your handset because of the limited power of the handset, whether you're talking about your laptop or your phone. It's got a limited power, so it does have a limited radius. When you introduce clutter to the situation, that 4 or 5 mile footprint shrinks even more because, as I said, topography can block it, buildings can block it, etc. And if you look at the last page of your RF report, I showed this last time. It's the topo map, or the topography map of the area. And this is exactly why it is so challenging in that area of town if everybody's looking at that last page, it's entitled the terrain map. The proposed tower site is right in the middle. It's marked Wolfeboro 2. You'll see it has 147 AGL. That's above ground level. The reason they didn't use 160 is because the Verizon antennas are going to be basically at the 150 mark, or 147 it's on here. Surrounding sites where Verizon already has sites, there's one up here in Ossipee. It's shown by these little triangular patches. There's a couple in Ossipee. There's one down here in Wolfeboro. They don't reach that site in large part because of the topography. The radio frequency waves get blocked. And so there's this stretch of 28 as it goes through those ridge lines that's very, very difficult to reach from any surrounding sites. Yes?
Do you want to finish your presentation and then take questions, or?
Whatever you want to do.
So in one of the requirements, it talks about other towers.
Yep.
So you're not showing anybody else's towers. Do you have some of that information?
We
now
do.
Or later? Okay.
These are not our towers. These are other people's towers.
Ah.
And what's very important for the board to understand, and I'm jumping ahead of myself a little, but since it's on that point, if you look at page 6 of the RF report, you will see a list of all Verizon's sites within 2 miles of the town. I'll let everybody catch up to it. Everybody have that chart? Page 6. It should have a caption that says pertinent site data. Have that? Okay. That lists the Verizon sites in Ossipee, Sanbornville, Tuftonboro, but it also lists the sites in Wolfeboro. And Verizon is on, reading from the bottom up, Verizon is on the water tank at the high school. They've got antennas on that water tank. They're using that existing structure, and it can't reach this area. They are on a rooftop downtown on Leonard Street, and again, they're using an existing structure, but that site can't reach that area. And by the way, rooftops, unless you have a really big building in a town like Wolfeboro, rooftops are not great sites because you don't get a lot of height and you get a lot of clutter usually right around you. Verizon is also on 2 other towers, and again, I would ask Peter if you have detailed questions about these other sites, but there's a monopole off Governor John Wentworth Highway. Verizon's already on it. There's one on Bennett Hill. Verizon's already on it. So Verizon's already using all these other existing structures.
So are they using all the available structures?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no, because keep in mind, this is where we need to bring coverage.
Well, the reason I ask, and the internet's a dangerous place, I understand that, to get information. But AT&T apparently says they have coverage all the way out 28, and they have a tower out there someplace that provides coverage to this little valley area, which doesn't include the historic area that also doesn't have coverage probably. But when I see that there's coverage from AT&T on 28, I wonder where that's coming from and why is that not a viable option?
I don't know where it's coming from. I can't speak for AT&T. I don't represent them. I can tell you under the law, and this is why the Federal Telecommunications Act in 1996 was passed, a town cannot say, oh, we have AT&T, so we're not going to allow for Verizon or anybody else. You have to give, under the law, each carrier an equal opportunity, a reasonable opportunity to bring coverage to town.
So doesn't that reasonable opportunity include the attempt to co-locate on another carrier's tower?
Which we have done.
Okay.
If you, I mean, I don't mean to be flip, but if you can tell us what tower exists in that area, we'll be happy to consider it. But we don't believe there is, and that's why I went through that list, because
Okay. It doesn't identify necessarily where these are on a road that I can't really tell. So if you say that you've looked at all existing towers, no matter who they belong to, because you could co-locate potentially, and then that's not feasible for you, then that's really what I wanted to know.
We have located all available towers, and it's not feasible. And the proof is in the pudding. If you look at attachment A to your RF report, this is Verizon's existing coverage in that area. It's entitled Attachment A, existing 700 megahertz coverage. Everybody have that? Okay. What that RF map shows you in green is Verizon's existing coverage from all those surrounding sites, the water tank up at the high school, the rooftop downtown, etc. This is where they're trying to bring coverage, again, right in the middle. And you can see there's no coverage down here, or very spotty coverage. And that's the significant gap in coverage that Verizon and T-Mobile is going to try to address. And this map has these surrounding sites turned on, but the proposed tower is not turned on. It's off for the purposes of this plot. If you go to the next one.
Before you make that change, I have a good friend that works for AT&T.
I'm sorry?
I said, I have a good friend that works for AT&T. And last fall, I called up and said, I'm looking at switching to AT&T. Would you dig into what the coverage is like in my area? And he's been to my house. He said, don't make a move to AT&T. They don't have the coverage that Verizon has. And that's with existing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to AT&T coverage, but I don't doubt that, but if you go to the next sheet, which is, I believe, just attachment B in the RF.
Can you just tell me what is the mileage that's covered by this map?
There's a scale in the lower left-hand corner.
Ah, I see it.
Is 700 megahertz 4G?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I would note, well, first let me finish my thought. If you look at the next sheet, this has all the surrounding sites turned on, but now the proposed site is also turned on. It shows the coverage footprint that Verizon anticipates getting from this site. And as you can see, it does a really good job filling in that gap. And I'd also note, and I would ask Sohail to correct me if I'm wrong, but the 700 megahertz has a much bigger footprint than 1900 megahertz. The PCS, what probably your phone is, and I'm going to ask him to correct me if I'm wrong, but there are a couple different frequencies here, okay? And way back when, the FCC auctioned off parts of the radio frequency band to bidders, and they were obviously the telecommunication companies, the Verizons of the world. And so they paid billions of dollars to have the right to propagate over various slots or parts of the radio frequency spectrum. And so the 1900 megahertz spectrum is a higher frequency, if you will, than the 700 megahertz. Most carriers have the right to propagate in both bands, the 1900 band and the 700 band. The 700 band has a much bigger footprint than the 1900 band because of the waves, et cetera, the radio waves. And so if there's a significant gap in coverage at the 700 megahertz band, there's going to be a much bigger gap in coverage in the 1900 megahertz band, and that could affect as well, you know, the coverage that you have or you don't have now. So this, if anything, in terms of what Verizon and later T-Mobile are going to be doing, is all, I don't want to say best case, but this is better coverage even than the 1900 megahertz band, which they also have to propagate in. But as I said, I'm skipping ahead a little because we already talked about this surrounding sites that Verizon is on. Building a tower, you may not believe this, but building a tower is always the last resort. Why? Because we have to come in front of boards all the time and get variances, and it can be very difficult to do. And there's a reason Verizon, when it came to town, went on the existing towers, went on a rooftop, went on the water tank, and then did this last. Well, there are two reasons. One, honestly, it's further out from the center of town, and when you're building your networks, you try to get the main populations first. But also because this is a raw land site. And GMR knows what it's like to go through these processes. Verizon knows what it's like to go through these processes. It's always a last case scenario for a carrier to do a raw land build because it can be so time consuming and difficult.
So can I ask you a question with regard to that? In the end, over a long period of time, doesn't not owning the tower be more beneficial than leasing on somebody else's property?
That's a business decision I can't answer other than to say when I started, and again, I've been doing this literally since 1996. Can't believe that. The carriers were building towers. I zoned a number of towers for Sprint and other carriers. They got out of that game. They still do it occasionally, but the vast majority of sites are the GMRs of the world, American Tower Corporations, Vertex Tower, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of tower companies because the carriers have
That wasn't their business.
Off shifted. Well, I think I can't say other than I always assumed it didn't make financial sense. But yeah, it's probably not, owning real estate is not their core business. So it's rare now that a carrier will actually build a tower. In fact, I don't think I've done one of those in years. It's pretty rare.
I have a question. Your comment about 1600 megahertz?
1900.
1900.
Yeah.
That's 5G? No? That's still 4? 3?
Suhail Osmani for the record, Madam Chair, and the board members.
Speak into the microphone.
Sorry. Suhail Osmani for the record. So the answer to the question is there can be 5G on 1900. And I just want to add to what John said about the frequencies. Verizon also uses a higher frequency band, which is the 2100, and commonly known as AWS. And as John explained, the lower the frequency you're on, the bigger the pie, if you will, it will be. And the higher frequencies tend to attenuate faster, and they have a smaller footprint. So 2100, you can imagine, will have a much smaller footprint compared to, if I was to plot out 2100 or 1900, you'd see a lot more white gaps here than what you see here.
One last question. He made a comment that the normal range on these towers is about 5 miles on an average.
That was assuming if it was
Line of sight.
If there was no clutter meaning anything above the elevation, and if it was a relatively flat terrain, then you could have 5, 6, 7 miles, depending on the height of the antenna.
Thank you.
And I guess that leads to my next question. You said you started in 1996?
I did, yes.
Okay, so these, it looks like these were written in 2001, not too long after you started, and now they're 20 years old. So, we're looking at some different technology and requirements with the new cell phone stuff that maybe don't line up with what the requirements in our code book are. So just want to keep that difference in mind, that everything here may not be spoken to in here. There's a lot of stuff in here that may not be relevant anymore.
In here by meaning what, the ordinance?
In the zoning, as far as the things we're supposed to be looking at.
Our regulation.
Our regulations.
I don't want to characterize your ordinance because, honestly, your ordinance is my ordinance. I live in town. I think that there's some really good things in there. I think there's some things in there that should be revisited. And we're going to talk about one very shortly after we do the visual study. But the height limitation is tied to an average tree canopy, quote unquote. But the average tree canopy is defined as measuring every tree over 20 feet. That's not the canopy. It's not even close. But I digress. I
read that argument of yours, and I read the canopy to mean something else. So it'll be interesting when you discuss that.
I read. We can talk about that. But in any event, and I will also say, I was just looking. I should know this off the top of my head, and I don't. But I believe the ordinance requires additional co-location slots. If it doesn't, it certainly strongly encourages you. And so by proposing a 4-carrier pole here, GMR is doing exactly what your ordinance basically says to do. And the reason, and this is one thing that the ordinance gets right, absolutely. The reason you want additional spots is so that when you finally do approve a tower, you have the absolute right to, if somebody's coming into town, to say, and you've already done it with us here tonight, prove to us you can't use this tower up on 1642 Center Street. If AT&T or USL comes in here and says, geez, we want to build our tower right down here, you can absolutely say, go prove you can't use the one on, at 1642 first. which is what you've done with us. And you can do that. And that's why, as I said, the ordinance gets this absolutely right. You do want additional spots up there.
You've made my argument for me about co-location. That's the first thing that we look at,
Right.
too, is where could you co-locate without building a tower? You made the correct argument is that if that tower gets approved, then the town will say, okay, look there first.
Right.
All right, but I'm
Sure.
saying in reverse,
Right.
I'm hung up on, I don't know as though I understood or heard enough information about other towers in a 5-mile radius or a 20-mile radius, whatever it's supposed to be, that you could go and co-locate on, which you do. It's not something you can't do because you do it on the water tower.
Right.
You do it at Bennett Hill. You do
Well,
it, I don't know, all around. So I haven't been able to grasp where you've been that you can't co-locate.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just
Okay.
can't.
We've been everywhere. There is a tower.
But where does it show me that?
It shows you right here, because here,
Well, but do you have a,
It's on the tape
You have-
we looked at.
what is
one of the waivers we asked for,
Is it this page?
it is page
Is
6.
it this page?
It's page 6, combined with that first plot, Plot A, that shows the total lack of coverage.
I don't see a page number. Where? Okay,
Yep, this is
all
it.
right, so, yeah, okay.
Okay? Backing up one step, and then Mr. Usmani is going to say something as well, but one of the things the ordinance does not get wrong, but don't feel bad because every ordinance does the same thing. Everybody says, bring in a map showing all your sites within 20 miles. And we asked for a waiver from that. The reason being, as I said last time when we were talking about the waiver, it's useless talking about towers 20 miles away. They don't reach the site. 20 miles from where we're standing is like Rochester, right? So why do we need to talk about towers 20 miles away when there's not a tower in the world that propagates 20 miles for this technology? There's not a tower in Rochester that comes anywhere close to Wolfeboro. It just doesn't. So, same thing with 10 miles. And believe it or not, with this topography, same thing with 5 miles. There's no, when I show you, this is why I put this up on the big board. Verizon has no coverage here. It's on a site up in Ossipee, a few miles away. It's on a site up to us, Ossipee sites. It's down here in Wolfeboro. There's no existing structure or tower, and structure means anything, building, rooftop, anything that
Church
reaches
steeple?
church steeple that reaches this location. It just doesn't.
Could I guess I understand that you're answering the question.
Yep.
But the wording on this chart still doesn't say any tower. It specifically continues to say Verizon locations.
Right.
So does this include other locations that Verizon has not already co-located on?
That chart does not. The RF report does.
Okay, and where
And
is that?
Mr. Cook and Mr. Usmani can also talk to that. But I guess my question to you would be, and I don't mean to be flip about this, what tower are you talking about? You live
Well,
in
see,
town.
that's what you're supposed to be showing us.
No, I know, but and I've said we've done it. And now you're saying, but we don't
So-
agree.
so it-
And so I'm like, okay, what
So
tower
if
have we
you've
not?
done it, then you simply take off the word proposed Verizon and wireless sites and just say wireless sites on here.
That's okay. Yeah, go right ahead.
All the sites that are in that.
Please use the microphone.
Sorry. All the sites that are in that chart are Verizon sites.
I see that, but are there other sites that are not Verizon sites that are in this area that you're looking at and not included on this chart?
I think the only site would be Beach Hill? No.
Can we use the microphone?
Yeah, okay, well, we're going to talk in 1 minute. All right, Mr. Cook's going to address that point.
Okay.
I'll take my shot. There are no existing towers or existing rooftops, anything, frankly, that breaks the tree line that is available. The only tower that they are not on that's kind of sort of nearby is an old AT&T landline tower that's up at the top of Beach Pond Road. If you
On
go
the
up
right.
past the dump, up into Tuftonboro, there's a tower up there. So every time, the problem is that tower does not reach 28. So these guys would have looked at it because it's an existing site and it's available. And again, they would rather just go pull a building permit and go on a site if it works. So they eliminated that as not being able to meet the RF objective in terms of coverage on Route 28. There is nothing else, no other existing towers anywhere, or rooftops, church steeples, anything that would get you coverage on 28 in the area that they're talking about, and obviously the surrounding area to 28.
In what kind of radius? How many miles?
Well, as John was saying, you get a couple mile radius. If you look at these sites, typically it's a 1.5 mile, 2 mile radius. So even if, so the problem with the Beach Pond site, frankly, is that there's hills in front of there, like Pork Hill and like the hill that we are on, that would block signal from 2 hilltops away that would get you onto 28. So it's because of the topography, you really got to get up on top of what's going on. The other piece is that when we looked at where could we put the tower, we have a scenic view shed, as you know, in town as well. So really everything to the southwest of Pork Hill Road is in that view shed. And there's also another view shed just to the south of our site. So we were pretty well locked in, even from a raw land perspective, to find a site that was outside of the scenic view shed that's also protected under the bylaw.
Is that Beach Pond Road site still being used by AT&T?
It is not. It's actually an old landline. They used to have a big microwave backbone system, so it was part of the microwave backbone system. So I don't think there's actually anything up on there because it really doesn't. The difference is that was microwaves that kind of linked all the way down through the state, right into Waltham, I think, is where that ended up. The problem with that site, you're dealing with the cell carriers. It's a much lower frequency, much lower power than that. So microwave is point to point and would go many miles. This is really, as you probably can tell from this, that signal is just doesn't go much more than a couple mile radius. So, and even with that, if you look at in detail some of these plots that Asmani had put together, there's areas within a couple miles that you're going to have some questionable coverage as well because there's either a small hill in the way or heavily treed or whatever. So it's a real challenge to get to fill the white spot there reliably.
Peter, can I ask a quick question? The one that's 693 Governor Wentworth Highway, is that Pierce Camp Birchmont?
Yes.
Thank you.
So they're on Camp Pierce Birchmont. They're on the 5th Estate Tower on Bennett Hill. And really the only other tower that I'm aware of in town is the radio tower off of Varney Road, which is a couple hundred feet. And that's
WASR Tower, you mean?
It's pardon?
When you say
The old
radio-
ASR tower. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that of course is even further away than Bennett Hill. So
We could see another tower looking west from where we were standing at the new site location.
yes, there's some in Ossipee. There's a couple.
It was a
in
Wolfeboro address, I think. It was off of North Wolfeboro Road.
Ossipee.
And it was we were told it was abandoned.
That would be the AT&T tower. Yeah. That would almost be northwest, probably northwest of that site.
And they just leave, when they're not used anymore, they just leave them there
Yeah, that was never removed. That was back, I'll bet you that tower's 40, 50 years old now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Do you happen to know how tall a radio tower is?
That tower,
just-
because I live pretty close by, is actually 203 feet high.
Yeah, they extended it recently, I guess.
I don't think it's been extended. I think it is, as we might have mentioned last meeting, around 200 feet where the FAA requires lighting. So my personal pet peeve is they just take 4 feet off the thing. They don't have to light it anymore. But obviously they have the rights to do it. I suspect when the old airport was out on the neck that's probably why it was lit. So it might have been required to be lit either way, just because of the proximity to the old airport. Now that's gone, obviously. I don't know. I think the current owner is considering replacing that tower, and I believe he's probably been in to see planning at some point. But I think at that point they'd probably come in and talk to you about whatever they have to do there.
I have kind of just a practical kind of question. For the lack of knowing the full scope of all of this, I just looked up for a list of FCC registered and approved antennas and towers in the Ossipee area.
Yep.
And there's 31.
Yep.
And some of them are at the height that's not suitable for you at this time, in the 57, 59 height
Yep.
category. I have no idea what kind of towers they are.
There's a lot of
older
older towers out there. So you got some old ham towers, that kind of stuff.
My question to that is, did you look at those sites? Like, could you rent land from them, lease land from them?
I think if you plotted them, they would not be close enough to 28. There's nothing really close enough to 28. And even if there were, we need the same relief. If we're going to be adding height, I mean, you're basically replacing the entire tower at this point. Most of those older towers structurally wouldn't be able to accommodate anything, the carriers in particular.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you eliminated Pine Hill. There's...
Well, Pine Hill would be...
It would be to work with these people, tear theirs down and build one there in the site where there's already been some activity.
There's nothing in the air. So Pine Hill, that tower is most likely the Bennett Hill Tower, because that's located off of Pine Hill Road. The access is off of Pine Hill Road.
Well, they say Route 16 at the Ossipee town line. They say
Route 16 is in
Walker Hill.
Ossipee, so that's well to the west. So the closest site you'd have is probably Walker Hill over in Ossipee.
See, I think it would have been
and they're over
helpful for us, or at least for me. I'm only one vote.
Right, Walker Hill.
And
Yes, yep.
it would have been helpful for me to have some sort of list of all those that you eliminated. That map is up your alley. It's not up mine. So something in writing of the list.
Well, that map shows every existing tower that's close to where we are. That is everything in the radius. If you plot everything else that you're talking about, it's outside of the radius of the sites that are around this site.
I'm also-
I have a question.
Audrey,
Let's just get down here.
oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question. You said that there's about 10 feet between the carrier locations on the pole.
Yes,
What's the maximum number of carriers that can be on the pole?
We've designed it for 4.
I heard you talk about 4. I mean,
Yeah, there's typically, there's 4 licensed carriers in this market, which is why we kind of designed it for that, which is typically what you'd find. So,
in the, you said you don't need the guide wires where they go inside and up the pole, inside the pole, correct?
yes, they do. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, cables have actually changed a lot over the years. So what you're probably used to cable-wise is the big black cables, a bundle of cables going up the tower legs. Those are the old coaxial cable. They don't use that anymore. Now they're using fiber and a low voltage. So from a tower perspective, The structural it's a little bit different. That would really affect wind loading. Now they have more stuff at the top, which affects some of the point loading. So that's changed a little bit, but from a streamlining and to be able to use the monopole design rather than the old lattice tower with the legs that you needed to be able to get all the cabling up there, you can go with the 4 foot diameter poles that we're using.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sarah?
Okay, I just did a couple of things. One was just a little bit of,
Use the microphone.
couple of questions. One was just a little bit of clarification. If you look in 175, 169D, it says if the zoning board adjusts that planning board approve a co-location for personal wire service facility site, goes on to say, facilities specified in a special exception in site plan approval shall require no further approvals. However, the addition of any facilities not specified in the approved special exception and site plan approval shall require a new special exception site plan. So you guys are showing us 4 it is.
Yep.
And, I mean, you don't have to fill out all 4, but that's it. So if you look up the ordinance, Kate, it's in there. Any additional ones, you would have to come in again, or, But I had...
If I have 5 carriers, I'm more than happy to come back and talk to you all about it. I'll come every night.
Indeed. Then there was one in here, they were talking about, Suzanne was talking about a list, and I just had it, but then I got distracted by that other one. You are supposed to, 175, 163 location, A4A. It says the applicant shall submit to the planning board a list of all contacts made with the owners of appropriate structures, buildings, water towers, existing telecommunications facilities, utility poles and towers and related facilities within the region regarding the availability of potential space for a personal wireless service facility. The planning board at its option may provide a list of additional suitable sites. The applicant shall contact the property owners of those structures. And then it goes on to say, in B, the applicant shall provide copies of all letters and inquiry made to owners of existing buildings, towers, blah, blah, blah.
And normally we would do that.
Well, let me just finish. Rejection documentation shall be provided.
If there's, if there were a tower that were available, say the RF guys were able to eliminate that old AT&T tower. If they couldn't eliminate it, then we would, so the next step is it's got to work from an RF perspective. It needs to be able to hit what it needs to hit in terms of the coverage signal. So if there were another tower nearby that would do what this tower is doing, our next step would be, before we could promote another new tower, we would have to go to those tower owners and say, and try to do something. So if we went to that tower owner, and the tower, we would either have to do a structural analysis to show that the tower couldn't accommodate, we're trying to say it was one of these older towers, or if we went to that tower owner and they said, well, we'd like $1 million a year for rent, which isn't reasonable, then before we could propose the new tower, we would basically have to eliminate any towers that could be used as an alternative. But in our view, we only have to do that if that alternative is a viable tower from an RF perspective.
I understand about the signal thing. I have an 80-foot tower attached to my house, okay? Dale's the ham radio operator for probably 50, 60 years. But
An exempt
it's
from the bylaw.
asking for this proof here that you have made contacts and determined that something was unavailable. And I think that's what Suzanne was asking about.
Go ahead.
If I may.
And it doesn't explain that the RF guy says it won't work, that's it. It says that you have to present
Those have to be
contacts.
viable alternatives. And if I may use an example, if we were looking for a rooftop in downtown Wolfeboro, we couldn't just go to the first rooftop owner we saw. We would have to show you who else we reached out to, because down in there are probably half a dozen or more viable rooftops. Up here, there are no viable alternative structures. There's, in this area, where the gap in coverage is, we're not talking about 5 miles away. This is the gap in coverage. This is the area we are here for tonight, and under the law, this is where we have a right to try to bring coverage. If there are alternative structures that bring coverage in this area, we would have done that, but there aren't any. There's no water tanks, there's no church steeples, there's no towers that bring coverage to that site.
Excuse me?
Yep.
There is a church steeple. We saw it from the viewing site.
Right. And what's the height of that and what's the distance?
Well, you tell me.
I don't know, but it's not going to bring
Well,
coverage.
Victor knows.
It's not going to bring coverage to this area. It's not a viable alternative.
I'd like to hear Victor. He's the engineer of building these things. He could tell us. Would you, Victor? Because I have another question as well for Victor.
Victor Jerome with Green Mountain Holdings. So, you know, when you take this particular site, you know, we have a gap along Route 28 that's in the North Wolfeboro area, which has been there for a long, long time. We spoke about this the last time we did the original zoning on the water tank back in, God, it was 13, 14 years ago. And it talked about gaps and future sites. And actually on that map, that plot, there's a site shown in this general area of North Wolfeboro along Route 28 that was proposed back then. That was just, we know we need coverage here and these other sites will never cover it. So that's the first thing. If I took this particular site, and I had been approached by, we had talked about several other landowners in this area, but I have one that's 2,000 feet away, and when I went and looked at it, the viability was there. The issue was the ground elevation is so drastic along Route 28. If I move this site 2,000 feet, if I literally move it across the street to the other side of Route 28 on the North Wolfeboro side, I lose 180 feet of elevation, which means I need to build a 340-foot site to duplicate the coverage to fill the gap that's required. If I move down by about a quarter mile to the corner of Route 28 and Pork Hill Road, in the North Wolfeboro intersection, that four-way, it's 200 feet. So now I need a 360-foot tower. So the change in the terrain is so drastic here. You know, we get lucky because when you pull up into the Evans property, you continue to climb, you continue to go into the tree line and away from the road, and what you gain is the benefit of the tree blockage. So when we get to the photo sims, it's a very difficult site to see. Visually, it will not be an impact. Whereas if I can tell you, if I pulled it closer to the road, I would need to go, anyone would need to go taller to duplicate the coverage, which is kind of what makes this site nice, right? At least from my perspective. So hopefully that does help. But there were alternative dirt locations to build a new site.
Could I just ask you, did you look at the Carroll County complex area? Because I tried driving around and I found a spot for which you have a picture and I have pictures, and you got a clear view to where your balloon was.
Yeah,
Isn't that the
And it
Walker
would
Hill?
seem- Wait a minute.
The Walker Hill site
One at
is
a
right
time,
behind there.
Please. Please. I'm having it seems it would be beneficial to everybody for communication if it could reach that spot. So that was my question. Have you looked at it, and will it reach that area if you were to put something there?
So I'm not sure if you noticed, but we built 120-foot, there's a 120-foot tower there that we built for the Carroll County Sheriff's Office about 2006 or 7 that takes care of their state police microwave that feeds the complex back into the state back to Hazen Drive in Concord, but there is a tower there already at the complex that they own, and that doesn't work. So I'm guessing that Verizon had ruled that out, but it's been there for many years.
Is the one at the complex lower than Walker Hill?
I'm not sure of
Okay.
Walker Hill, or I'm not sure where that is.
It seemed pretty, elevation seemed pretty much, from their parking lot, it seemed pretty much that I could see straight through over the trees. I could see a balloon.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, that's
just-
one of the few spots you could
I
see
mean,
it
it would-
from, I think because it's so clear and they've got the hay, they've got the hay fields and stuff there.
Just thinking it might be beneficial for both parties,
But,
that's all.
yeah, so we have built there before, but I believe that was ruled out earlier by the RF engineers.
Thank you.
If I may, I was going to say this after doing the visual study, but the appropriateness of a site, in my opinion, is usually gauged very well by the number of people who come out to object to it.
Gauged by what, I'm sorry?
Gauged by the number of people come out to object to it. We had a couple people last time, but we also had more people, I thought, in favor of this. We now have one gentleman sitting in the office, or sitting in the audience. I presume we'll hear from him, but this is a 160-foot tower. 160-foot tower, which I think we're going to prove pretty well. You can't really see it from most places. And usually, very often with a 160-foot tower, you have 50 people in the audience. I think that should be weighed here when we're talking about, geez, should you go elsewhere? Or have you looked at all the alternative sites, et cetera?
Number of people in the audience doesn't answer the 5 points, which is what we have to
It
deal
does
with.
not, but it's a pretty good indication of what the community thinks about it. Because I do this a lot, and when people are really upset about a 160-foot tower, they come to the meetings. And I think this board knows that intuitively. When you have a project that the community really doesn't like, do people not show up, or do people come out and tell you they don't like it? Question to ponder. Okay, so I'd like to move on to the visual study with that, if I may.
I'm all set. Visuals.
The visual study, which I handed out, that was the hard copy that I handed out tonight. And I think everybody here, or most people here on the board, were at the site walk where we also did the balloon test. For the record, a balloon test is when a large, in this case, 4.5-foot diameter red helium-filled balloon is floated to the height of 160 feet. And a crew then goes around town and takes pictures of where it can be seen from. And then they take those pictures and they put it in a report, which I handed out tonight. And in that report, you have both the before and after pictures, the before picture with the balloon, and then a scale representation of the tower is superimposed in the photograph. We had the balloon test on September 25th. It was run by Ms. Klum, who is here. She can answer any questions. The balloon was in the air for about 5 hours. I think we can all agree who were there that the weather was quite nice and there was not wind. There was very little wind. And what Ms. Klum did, or what they always do, is first page of the balloon, or the balloon test explains the background, but the first page is the photo location map. It's this page of the report. And if you look at that, the red X in the middle is the proposed tower location. The photographs, you'll see the little camera icons. Those are where the photographs were taken. We're going to walk through the photographs. And you can see there are some concentric rings on that map that show the distances. There's a half-mile ring, a mile ring, and a 2-mile ring. And the first photograph, photo 1, looking north from the end of Johnson Road. And it's kind of hard to see the balloon, but it's pretty much dead center. It's the little red dot in that clearing of leaves. If you go to the next page, photo 1 shows the superimposition of the monopole tower. And I'm going to, if I may, this is, I'll show you. Can everybody see where the tower is? Yeah. That's right there. That's where I'm looking. It's pretty hard to see. Everybody got it? The second photograph is from Route 28 at the Ospey-Wolfeboro town line. The balloon was not visible from this location due to the tree cover. The third photograph is looking northeast from North Wolfeboro Road. And you can see they have put in where the balloon is visible with the red arrow. It's kind of hard to pick up the balloon in the photograph. And then the next page, photo 3, shows the tower simulation. The fourth photograph was taken west from the end of Upper Trask Mountain Road, and it was not visible. The fifth photo was from Route 28 and Penn Air Road, approximately 1 mile southwest. The balloon was not visible from this location. Photo 6, northwest from Diamond Corner, which is the intersection of a number of roads there, approximately 1.1 miles. It was not visible. Photo 7, view northeast from Route 28, approximately 2 miles southwest. It was not visible. And then the last photograph, I believe this is the last photograph. It is. Photograph 8, set of photographs, I should say. Photo 8 from the County Farm Road in Ospey. This may have been what Ms. Ryan was just referring to. Approximately 1.2 miles northeast of the tower site. You can see the balloon in the first photo 8. It's over the cab of the red pickup truck, although again, it's a little hard to pick up. But then as you see the next photo 8, you get a clearer view of the simulated tower. And that's over the cab of the pickup truck. We think this has been a very successful balloon float. If you recall, when we submitted our application originally, we said we anticipated, based on the computer simulation we submitted, to have limited views, and we think the actual balloon test showed that. And again, I will repeat, the visual impact of a tower, in my experience, has been directly proportional to the amount of people who come out to object to it. If you can see, if the tower really sticks out, you get a lot of people complaining about it. If it doesn't, you don't. You have to make your own decision, but as somebody who's done tower hearings more than I can count, that's a pretty safe bet. I would also note Ms. Klum is doing, as part of her work on this project, the NEPA report. You are doing the NEPA report, right? Which is the National Environmental Policy Act. Sorry, I always blank on it. But before the tower can be built, they have to go through a procedure to make sure that there are no undue or unreasonable impacts on a whole list of environmental, cultural, historic, architectural, floodplains, wetlands, all sorts of things, Indian sites, endangered species. And she's and the final NEPA report is, if you've ever seen one, it's like 2 inches thick. But as part of that, she has to reach out to the State Historic Preservation Office and send them the materials. And I think we submitted this as part of the packet, but this is the response from the State Historic Preservation Officer. And this is dated September 6, 2022, and they found, quote, no historic properties affected by this proposed.
Thank you.
This is one part of the NEPA process.
Thank you.
And so we feel the record is very clear that this site will have limited impacts, very limited visual impacts, very limited impacts of any kind, any nuisance criteria, noise, smoke, odors, particulates, traffic, etc. So, if you have specific questions about the presentation, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'd like to go through the variance or special exception criteria, whichever the board would prefer I do first.
Anybody have a preference?
Yeah, I'd like the public to speak.
Oh, right.
Well,
Yeah, we have
I'd
to-
like to finish my presentation first.
Oh, I thought you were.
No, I haven't gone through the criteria yet. I fully expect him to speak, but
Special
I'm still in my
exception.
presentation.
I would go with the special exception first.
Yep. Pursuant to section 175-162B, personal wireless service facility involving the construction of a new tower requires a special exception. And that section, or the ordinance, sets out the requirements. And there are a number of them. I'm going to go through them. We did a detailed written application that addresses all of these criteria in further detail, but I'm just going to hit the main points. The first criteria is site suitability, meaning that the specific site is an appropriate location, including adequate usable space, access, and absence of environmental constraints, such as a floodplain, etc. In this case, we believe we meet that criteria. The property is an appropriate location. It is a very large property. It has excellent ground elevation. Mr. Druin spoke briefly about that. The higher these antennas can go, the better. You get better coverage. It has existing access and utilities. It doesn't impact environmental areas. As I said, we submitted a letter following the site walk from Ms. Klum that said it's not going to impact any wetland or wetland buffers. And in short, as I said, and you'll hear this several times as I go through these criteria, but in terms of the base equipment compound, it's going to be invisible to everybody. I mean, you just don't know it's there. You won't know it's there. So we think this is a really suitable site. The second criteria is the immediate neighborhood environment. This criteria means that the proposal is not detrimental injurious or offensive to abutting properties in particular and to the neighborhood in general, such as excessive trip generation, noise or vibration, dust, glare, heat, smoke, fumes, gas, odors, or inappropriate hours of operation. We meet all that, or we meet that criteria on all those points. Apart from the generator, there's no noise, no vibration, there's no dust, glare, heat, smoke, fumes, gas, or odors. The only trip generation, as I said, is 1 or 2 trips per month in a passenger vehicle by a technician. Therefore, we believe we meet that criteria. The next criteria is no undue nuisance or serious hazard to pedestrian or vehicular traffic, including the location and design of access ways and off-street parking. We don't really think this is applicable to us for this type of project, but we don't generate pedestrian traffic, we don't generate true vehicular traffic, and it's located well into the interior of a privately owned parcel. So we think we meet that. The next criteria is availability of public services and facilities. The only utilities we need are power and telephone. These already exist right up to the property. There's no need for water and sewer. We don't generate any wastewater, etc. I will note as well there is remote monitoring. The carriers remote monitor these sites, so if something goes wrong, an alarm goes off and people respond. Emergency responders can be there. And as I said before, the compound itself will be secured by a fence with 3 strands of barbed wire on top of it. The next criteria is appropriateness of site plan, including parking, traffic circulation, open space, fencing, screening, landscaping, signage, commercial vehicles, lighting impact. Again, I'm not really sure most of this I don't think is applicable to our type of project, but there is very little traffic. We have a small parking area that will handle that. There isn't going to be any signage except for small identifying signs on the fence telling you who the carriers are, etc. We don't believe there's a need for landscaping, and again, I pointed this out on the site walk. When you're standing where the compound is, you can't see anybody. Nobody can see in. It's very, very private up there, so to speak, and we don't think it's worth putting in the landscaping for that reason. The next criteria is immediate neighborhood integrity, meaning that the historical uses and established use patterns be weighed with the recent change in trends in the neighborhood. I just submitted the memo or the report from the State Historic Preservation Officer saying there are no impacts. Broadband and internet is extremely popular. We heard from some people before at the first hearing about how they're looking for better service. We believe there's a great need for these services up there. And therefore, we believe, given the limited visual impact shown by the balloon test, that the benefits far outweigh the impacts. The next one is impact on property values. There will be no impact or decline in property values here. The limited visibility is shown by the balloon test. You're not going to be able to see the compound. You're not going to be able to hear it. And I have to flip back for 1 second, but there are other towers in town, and we reached out to the town tax office, and it appears that no other party has ever filed for a tax abatement as a result of being in close proximity to a tower facility. The next criteria is the proposed use or structure is consistent with the spirit of Part 1 and the intent of the master plan. If Part 1 means Section 175(1) of the ordinance, which I think it does, that seeks to promote the orderly growth of the town and to promote the public health, safety, and convenience and general welfare, while at the same time preserving air and water quality, natural and scenic resources, historic sites and structures, and to protect the character. We feel we meet all those goals. Public safety, we have 2 letters, one from the police chief, one from the fire chief, both supporting this project and saying that they anticipate filling, in my words, lack of coverage up there. We don't impact historic sites as shown by the SHPO letter I just submitted. There is no air or water quality being impacted. And in short, we think that as shown by the balloon test, there's very little impact here. And as shown by the RF plots, there's a need for this service. And the other requirements, we had asked for a waiver of the 20-mile radius of the other facilities. We went through the RF plot in detail. We are seeking a height variance due to the topography and in order to allow 4 co-location spots on the tower. This will limit the number of other towers in town. We feel we have shown that there are no existing viable structures in this area where the significant gap in coverage is that we can locate on. And there are other requirements in section 164, 165, 166, and 167. Some of those requirements deal with the radio frequency exposure report, which we submitted. We haven't talked about that, but it shows that this site will comply with all FCC guidelines. There are no environmental impacts here. It doesn't discharge wastewater. It's not in a wetlands. No, there's no hazardous waste generated or discharged. We talked about the galvanized steel finish. We feel that's the best. We're willing to talk about that if you want, but we feel that's the best. As Peter Cook said, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but we don't, the ordinance sets out a number of scenic vistas. It's a little hard reading it to interpret it exactly, but this project does not infringe upon those scenic vistas in the ordinance. And as Peter explained, one of the reasons they went where they went was so that we could make that statement to the board. We wouldn't impact scenic vistas or scenic landscapes identified by the ordinance. And so those are the reasons we feel we should be granted the special exception. I'm happy to do the variance criteria now, or the board may take comments on the special exception, and then I can do the variance criteria. It's whichever the...
Let's do them separately.
Separate, please.
Okay, yep. Do you have any questions for me based on what I just said?
Yes.
I have a couple of miscellaneous questions. Relative to the paint color, our ordinance 175, 165, 165B2B. Sorry.
I could hear you.
I know, but we have
All right,
TV and
I get you.
everything. 175, 65B2B says, discusses paint color, galvanized steel in a light gray or light blue hue, which blends into the sky and color. So I don't think that's an issue, although it's actually more planning board than CBA.
Yep, I would agree with that.
Back to will not generate wastewater. You will have people coming to the site, and they will be there depending how long, depending on what type of problem they're encountering. Is there any plan for a porta potty there?
No,
No.
they're not up there long enough. They really aren't.
Okay.
No site in New Hampshire has that.
And I thought I had one more question. Ordinance requirements under 175, 166, you talked about a diesel generator and whatnot. Do you have a tray?
I'm sorry.
Do they plan to have some a tray or some kind of containment area underneath that in case there's any kind of a malfunction or a spill of any of the fluids in the diesel generator?
Yes, the generator itself usually has a double-walled tank, but underneath it, I would defer to Victor in terms of it's going to be sitting on a concrete pad.
I believe that this particular generator was a propane one, but when we do use the diesel generators, they are the double wall with so there's a containment, there's a tank within a containment tank. So it is a double tank essentially for a containment area. And then if there's other things that apply, we would, from a town regulation, or design or concern, we would build it that way.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to clear that up because I'm almost certain it's a diesel. The specs are at Exhibit 5, the specifications for the generator. It's diesel, but it does have a secondary containment tank for fuel. It's a 110%, which means it can hold more than they actually, the secondary
That's
one.
what's required is 110%.
Yeah, well, it's in there in the specs, sheet 5.
Anything else, Sarah?
No, thank you, Audrey.
Yep.
I respectfully disagree with my counterpart here about camouflage. I'd like to discuss that, and it was one of the waivers requested from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So at one point in time, you thought it was applicable for discussion.
We can discuss it.
Pardon?
Go right. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so you indicated in your previous presentation you were amenable to that discussion, and I guess, I don't know whether I'd rely on Peter or Victor, but, because I'm not quite sure what Peter's role is, management, but I know Victor bills, so I think I'd like to ask Victor if I may. I concede that it's not visible like on Route 16 when you see a lot of towers that are terribly visible, but you can see it from a few locations. So my question is, brushed galvanized, or painted gray, when the sun hits the top of it, and we all understand, I hope, that this is the tallest tower in Wolfeboro at 160, according to your chart that I look at. Well, I'm only using the numbers that are on the page that I got. But my question to Victor is, can you give me your perspective as to what will be less visible in the summer months when it's sunny, or any time of year when the sun hits it? Will we see you know what I'm trying to say. I need a microphone.
When the tower is first erected, it will probably be a little shiny, but within the first 6 or 7 months, the galvanizing dulls down. So when it comes out of the factory, it's shiny like you just waxed the floor. And you may get a glisten off from it. But if you go by most towers that have been up for any period of time, they've dulled down, so the sun oxidizes them and gets rid of that glaze or gloss, and they become dull. So whether you paint them gray or you leave them and let them remain gray, I don't think there's there's really any real benefit one way or the other. It's going to be the same result.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
Clear.
Okay. Are you set? Yeah.
Are you going to call for comments from the floor?
Yeah.
I'd
Okay.
like to hear the public.
Public would like to speak?
I'm Gordon Lang of North Wolfeboro and the president of the North Wolfeboro Area Association.
Hey, can you pull the microphone up to your mouth, up to your
Sure, thank you.
face? With the mask, it's even harder to hear.
I can take the mask off if you'd prefer.
Thank you.
I'm Gordon Lang, the president of the North Wolfeboro Area Association, and my comments are really kind of non-committal tonight, but being the only citizen here, I feel compelled to at least come up and say that I've worked with the members of the community, and several of us have drove around during the balloon test, and we saw pretty much what you've seen here tonight, that it was not visible to most of us as we were driving around from road height. I am concerned about what it will look like when the leaves are off the trees. I don't know if we can imagine that. It certainly doesn't matter where we have pine trees and things like that, but there's also a lot of hardwood there. So far, the only significant visual impact, the only person I know who's significantly impacted visually would be the Hewitts at the top of Trask Mountain Road, Upper Trask. And Kayla Hewitt was able to show me what it looked like from her vantage point, and it's visible, but it's not, she was not concerned about it. They see no harm there. I have to say that most of the residents in North Wolfeboro that I'm in touch with see this as a non-issue. I did hear some folks at the last joint meeting of the Planning Board and ZBA where there was at least one household that was quite concerned about the effects of the waves. I recognize this is not something we can prove. This was just a personal comment from a citizen on Fork Hill Road. So I know it's not 100% laissez-faire here, but I can't say that we see much negative to this, and there's enough feeling of need in the area that it seems like the least harmful way of approaching this, I guess. So it's a very bland response to something which has been a very provocative issue for me in the past. In other communities, I've been very vocal in opposition to ugly cell towers in bad locations, and I don't see that as an issue here.
Thank you. Anybody else? Everybody else is on the team, I guess. Any other questions before we deliberate on the special exception?
We're going to talk about the waivers. We haven't, as a board, voted on each of the waivers, whether we would grant them or not. We've talked about them, but we haven't voted whether we...
Okay. Are you going to go through the list?
Well, I'm going to use the document that says waiver request zoning board of adjustment. That's,
I could be wrong, I'll check, but I thought they were all for items of completeness. I thought we were granted those waivers.
we didn't, you presented them, and we have this 3-page sheet that I thought we would use.
My recollection was at the joint meeting, the planning board went through their page of waivers so that they could,
They did, they voted to
I'm
grant
talking,
theirs.
yeah, so that they could accept your application as complete. But since the ZBA doesn't accept an application as complete, we didn't really do that.
And we were
You got to
requesting,
accept it. You have to accept it as complete before you can have a public hearing.
The ZBA does
no,
not.
the ZBA doesn't do that.
Okay.
We don't.
Now that you say that, I do remember that we started with number 3, so maybe we did go through these.
Well, I think one of the questions the board might want to consider is if there is a waiver, if there is a board member or members that believe that they need more information to make the findings for a special exception, that should be addressed, whether it's addressed as a waiver or not, because the board really doesn't have a waiver provision to a special exception application. You know, the application form looks for the criteria, the applicant fills in their responses to the criteria, and then the board deliberates on whether those criteria do or do not satisfy the special exception criteria. But of course, if there's something that the board still has a question on that may be addressed through one of the waivers, then I think you should ferret that out, but I don't.
We haven't taken any action on the waivers other than to gather input.
That's my point. You really don't have a waiver provision for a special exception.
No, we don't, but we've been told by council, even though it is not in our rules of procedure, that we can waive certain requirements. And that's my point is, we have seven waivers requested, and I think we should go through them and yay or nay. Yes or no? Some of them are benign and some of them may not be.
I think I kind of understand what the town planner is saying. We've been through the meaning of each of these in the presentation with our questions about these. So is there something that you would waive that we haven't, that we don't want, that we haven't got already?
There is, well, let's go through them.
If I may be heard real quickly. 175, Section 175-168C2 states, the Zoning Board of Adjustment and the Planning Board may waive one or more of the application filing requirements. You have the authority to waive.
Yes.
Right. Well, I thought I heard somebody say, no, we can't waive. Okay.
We don't have it in our rules of procedure, but attorney has advised us that we can waive on an application.
Okay, because it's in the order.
That's what I'm trying to get at, is
Right.
go through them. For the most part, probably.
Okay. I intended.
I don't want to say I make a motion to waive 1 through 7. I would like to go on record that we go through them because we're going to get another tower application somewhere down the road, I'm sure. So I would like to go through 1 through 7 at a time. And the first one was about the 20-mile requirement for exhibits and so forth. And I think it's been well explained. I initially put no, I wouldn't waive it, but I think it's been well explained that why they are asking for a waiver, and I would move that we waive number 1.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Number 2.
It's a moot point.
Yeah, I've got a note here.
It's a moot point.
Pre-application has been done, so it's moot.
Yep.
Number 3 is the photographs. We don't have straight line drawings, I guess. It's talking about limited views. I would vote that we waive straight line drawings and citing elevations.
I second
We
that.
have site elevations, so number 3 has been met. I would move that number 3 has been met. We're going to vote on it?
Second, it's been met. All in favor?
Right.
Aye.
Number 4. We've gotten substantial information verbally as well as some of it written as to the equipment, including antennas, mounts, the shelters, the equipment within the monopole and so forth. Got a good explanation on that, so I would move that we waiver anything further on that.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. camouflage doesn't have a number. I'd just soon accept the testimony of Victor Druin. So we'll move on to number 5. Computer-generated point-to-point printouts of the lighting of the site. Well, the tower will not be lit, and it's been explained that there'll just be a household light on the cabinets. So I would move that we waive number 5.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Number 6 was the noise report, and relevant to the nearest property line. We've had a good explanation on that. That's checked approximately once a month, as I recall. And they have a regular schedule. They try to make it so it happens at 2 p.m. on weekdays, not during weekends or early mornings. So I would say waive number 6.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Number 7, if this goes forward for an approval, I will make that as condition of approval,
That's fine.
just to get it in
Yep.
print.
Yep.
So that will not be waived, that will be discussed when we get to final approval.
Well, if I may, I'm not asking you to waive the submission of the NEPA report. I'm just saying at the time of filing the application.
I understand that,
Yep.
so I just say,
Yep.
no action at this time on that. And the last page is not relevant to,
I think those are planning boards.
that's not relevant.
Yeah,
to-
they got stuck on yours. Sorry.
So therefore, we've gone through those.
Okay.
Now, we go through the special exception, if I can find it again.
Let me just talk a little bit about the new regulation, Tavis, with a
Fact-finding.
fact-finding that we're supposed to do for our decisions. So I think it may be in our best interest to do, to have Laura help us write that after we talk and vote here, so that we have it.
Findings of fact?
Yes, findings of fact. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll make the decision based on what we talk about, but as far as that formal findings of fact, instead of trying to get you to write exactly the wording we're putting forth,
It should be you and Laura.
me and Laura, or, yeah. So I think that's probably what we'll plan on doing.
Okay, there's a time limit on it, but we can get there.
Yeah, all right.
The only question I have is if you're going to deliberate, are you going to close the public hearing on special exception or leave it open?
I
can-
think we,
You-
well,
You can close special exception without closing variance. They're just both open right now.
right. Is there, do we need to? I mean,
No,
can we
you let
deliberate
people-
without
you-
closing
You
it?
can let people speak all night long if you'd like.
No, we don't want that.
I'm not going to speak all night long, trust me.
So, okay, well then, we'll close the public hearing for the special exception criteria, and we can deliberate and vote on this. So do you want to start with the,
Yeah, I'll use the letters that you have
Yep.
on your special exception, section G, according to page 8, starts with A, site suitability. I think it's been well documented that the site is suitable. There are no steep slopes, there are no floodplains. We got a letter this evening that there's no
Wetlands?
high-intensity wetland soils. And the property is, given the testimony we heard this evening, an appropriate location. So I would move that.
does anybody else have any
Oh,
statements on
okay, I'm
that?
sorry, yep.
Sarah, did you have anything to add?
No, she was looking for a word for
Oh, is that,
the,
okay.
the wetlands, that was all.
Any other comments then?
Clear.
Okay, then, no, well, you want me to go right through all of them?
Okay.
B,
Yep.
immediate neighborhood environment. It's interesting that the Federal Communication Acts talks about, and we'll probably talk about this when we get into the variance. They look at it a little differently than we do with a normal special exception or a variance as to what they see as a neighborhood. So given that the way it was described to us, specifically for a tower, I would say that the neighborhood is an appropriate neighborhood. There will not be excessive trips. They've done a noise study. I asked about glare from the monopole, and it seems as though that will take care of itself as it ages. And the setback from the property line is within the requirement. And low impact. So I think number B, immediate neighborhood environment, has been met.
Any other comments? Nope. Okay. You're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. C, no undue nuisance or serious hazards to pedestrians or vehicle traffic, including the location, design, and access ways. Well, that one is definitely met. It's primarily all on private property, and they have an existing access way partway up to the site itself, so I think C has been met.
Okay. Go ahead.
D, availability of public services and facilities. As they say, there really are none other than the power to the cabinets and the electric to keep the facility lit, and the generator backup. They don't need sewer, water, or any of that, so I think they're in pretty good shape on D. Looks like Sarah has something.
Yeah, I have a quick question about that. Is there any type of alarm system?
We'll close the public hearing.
Yeah, you can
That's
ask them.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Artie.
We closed the public hearing, so we
We have
can't.
to reopen it.
That's
can't.
okay, I'm
So
just.
ask-
You're
I'm
asking us.
Yes, I'm asking
okay.
us. They talked about all various and sundry alarms for various and sundry things, so I was just, it wasn't specific as to whether there was a fire alarm. If you have diesel fuel there and everything else.
Well, it
it's-
does say that they're monitoring it for fire.
Okay.
Electronically, so there may not be an
Okay.
alarm, but there's a notification of some kind.
There are those alarms. I know it's closed, but there are.
Okay.
Remote monitoring of the site in case of fire,
Yes.
under D.
Okay.
Would not be unlike any other facility that we have here in town. So I would say D has been met.
Yep.
E, appropriateness of site including parking, traffic, circulation, open space, fencing, screening, landscaping, signage, commercial vehicles, lighting, impact. I think all of those have met. There's minimal sign, minimal traffic, certainly won't be public traffic. Open space, they had 74 acres, I think it was something like that. They've talked to us about the fencing around the 100-square-foot area, I believe it is. And we haven't talked about screening, but I don't see the need for screening. It's so remote, not visible to the public. So I would think, for the most part, E has been met.
Okay.
F, immediate neighborhood integrity, meaning the historical use and established use patterns be weighed with recent changes in the trend in the neighborhood. Well, there really haven't been any recent trends change in the neighborhood. Whether that be good or bad is your own personal opinion, but it is not going to interfere with the past historic neighborhood as it was and as it is. I can't see any impact. And it seems as though that the area is in need, and the people in the area don't seem to have an issue with it. So I think F has been met. Okay. G, impact on property values. Well, we don't have any real solid testimony on that. We've heard the opinions, but you know, they're basically saying telecommunication towers that don't have a visibility, an extreme visibility would not have an impact on the property values. And it doesn't seem as though we give abatements for properties that have communication towers on them, or to the abutters that have communication towers next to them. So it doesn't seem as though it has any impact for many of the homeowners, and there are no businesses in that area. So I think G has been met. Okay. H, the proposed use or structure consistency with the spirit of Part 1 and intent of the master plan. Well, as they've stated here, it is basically to preserve the character of the town, and this doesn't distort the character of the neighborhood by erecting the monopole as been depicted to us for a special exception. And by the way, well, I'll wait. Yeah, okay. By the way, Wolfeboro does allow for cell tower communications. We don't prohibit them. We allow them through special exception. And the Telecommunication Act is its umbrella over our ordinance, and we are allowed to interpret our ordinances in the best interest of the town. And I think when we get to the height ordinance, we'll have a little more discussion on that. But I think that H has been met. Is that the end of it?
Yep, that's number 8.
So then, if the chairman would indulge, I would make a motion to approve the special exception for case number 13, SE 22, section 175, 161, personal wireless facility at 1642 Center Street, tax map 009001 for GMR Holdings of New Hampshire LLC and Wagon Wheel Trust.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'd like to add a comment before you go for vote on that.
Yep, we're going to take a minute and for any conditions requested.
You'll do that now, or do you want to do it? When I was doing this in Connecticut, we would always put a notice in there that if the cell tower stops being used, that GMR would have 24 months to remove the equipment from the site, including the cell tower.
Does the planning board have that in there already?
They do already? I still think we should add it in there. Because we heard tonight there's one on Beach Pond Road, there's one on Upper Trask Mountain Road
So
that are abandoned tower, they're not being used.
Can we just refer to the section in the
Could,
planning
yeah.
so that we don't have
Sure.
inconsistent wording since we don't know what it says? Can you add that to add the section in the
Perfect. Thank you.
For if it becomes unused, it needs to be removed or
If it
Taken
no
away.
longer is being
Well,
used.
we could do it here, and we can do it in the variance,
Well,
too.
sure, but I just didn't want to have language that was going to conflict with the
no, I
planning
agree.
board
I
language.
agree.
Okay.
This way you don't have abandoned, setups all over town.
I'll,
point.
I'll second that motion to amend it to add
Thank you.
All
particular
in favor
section.
of that motion to amend?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody against?
And then move the question.
Yes. So did you have any other conditions on this? Does
Not on
anybody else
this.
have any other conditions? Okay. we'll
I'll
move-
second her motion.
Second, didn't we already second it?
No.
I
Okay.
made the motion. Tim seconded it.
I did.
Luke
No.
seconds,
Oh,
okay.
Luke did.
Uh,
And he
Now we're back.
amended.
Yeah. All in favor of approval?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to take a 5-minute break before we
Sure.
start with the
Yeah.
variance. Thanks.
All right, so now we go to variance. Hey, Luke,
Hey,
can you treat us to some more?
for the
I think it's open.
variance?
No, it's open.
It's a different case number, so.
He read them both.
yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay.
And can I just ask you, Attorney Springer, we're going to start with page 6? Is that what we're using?
Well, I was actually going to start with page 5.
Yeah.
If you're looking at my narrative, yes.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about well, I think it's important to talk briefly about the tree canopy issue.
That was one of the things I thought might be never revisited and upgraded from 20 years ago, but.
That's almost a true, undoubtedly a true statement. The ordinance says the height limit shall not project higher than 10 feet above the average building height, or if there are no buildings, shall not project higher than 10 feet above the average tree canopy height, which is okay, except the way the ordinance then goes on to define average tree canopy height. And you have to find that height by inventorying the height of all trees over 20 feet in height. And when you bring in 20 feet in height, or all trees 20 feet high, you're not talking about trees, you're talking about saplings, and you're talking about little bushes. And so I've run into this before. We've done tree surveys before. They're incredibly time-consuming, incredibly expensive, and when you bring in 20 feet, honestly, you're lucky if the average height is over 50 feet high, because for every 100-foot tree, there's about 5 20-foot saplings, and that's the problem with that language. And just speaking as a resident, somebody should look at that, because what you're doing is generating variance requests almost automatically, because nobody's going to be able to meet that. Using 10 or 20 feet above tree, the canopy is fine, but you need to use the actual canopy and not this measure everything within 300 feet that's 20 feet or over. I won't believe.
I don't even get that, because if you have a tree canopy and you have a tower, and
Right.
you're trying to reach down here, isn't that canopy, I mean, if you're on a hill, which you're going to be, no matter
Right.
what, I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think you're talking two different things. If you're keep in mind, this is within a radius of 300 feet. So if you're within 300 feet of a tower with a handset, you're going to get coverage, regardless of what the tree cover is. There's no question, because you're 300 feet away. The problem is, if you have to go through that tree cover and you're 2.5 miles away, then you have major issues with the tree cover blocking the signals, et cetera. But
We've typically used the average tree canopy height in the state of New Hampshire, supposedly, is anywhere between 80 and 90 feet, on average. So if we use that and said 20 more feet, your height is still conceivably over that. With your permission, at the site, I took these pictures to show the trees. You're welcome to one.
okay.
I don't have enough for the board. But to show the trees at this site, and the trees are not 80 or 90 feet.
Right. That's the problem.
So, according to this, you should only be able to go 20 feet over the average tree height canopy of that site.
And that's the problem, hence our variance request.
Right. But
I mean, this is a
Yes,
perfect site. This
that-
is a perfect site. And yet, here we are talking about tree canopy height. Why?
Because the tower is so high. It's so tall.
No, the ordinance is so low. It's not the height of the
that's your
tower.
argument. Of course you're going to say that.
But
of
there's-
course you're going to say that.
We haven't heard from one person coming out tonight.
That isn't
No,
that-
please, this is exactly the point. We haven't heard one person come out for a 160-foot tower saying, lower this tower. Not one. That speaks volumes.
Well, we had one gentleman speak in opposition saying for the
Not tonight, we didn't.
gain, for the record, he spoke, he gave his background. We don't have minutes that I can show you what was said, but he said for the gain to the public, for what is going to be there, he didn't see the worth of the tower. I'm not going to get into the argument how many people sit in an audience for and how many people sit in an audience against. We've been instructed that that should not waive our decision on fact finding.
I agree.
And so I'm not even going to go there.
Well, I think we should, though.
Well, you're implying that because there's
I'm not-
nobody here speaking opposed to
Right.
it.
So a 160-foot tower, and not one person came out and said that tower's too high. This gentleman who spoke before, who hasn't even stayed around for the rest of the hearing, who was clearly opposed to it or not in favor of the first hearing, came out and he said tonight, I can't see much negative to it. And now we're going to talk about lowering the height?
He wasn't clearly opposed to it at the first meeting. He said, I
Okay.
reserve my opinion
Right.
till you fly the balloon.
Right.
So, I mean, but what are we arguing about? The
We're
request was
arguing-
for 160
Well, we're arguing
feet.
about the height.
We're
Thank
arguing
you.
about the tree canopy and
Right.
the height.
Yeah, but we're nowhere near the canopy for the height that's being asked for.
Right.
So either we're going to
And-
stick with the wording of the language and not
Well-
allow a 150-foot tower?
Semantically, it sounds like you're arguing potentially about whether you're asking for
Are you
160,
going to use the microphone?
160 feet where 40 feet might be allowed by the regulation, or 160 feet where 120 feet if you use the state average tree height.
Right, in either way,
You need-
this is taller than,
So, I mean, functionally, the question is, how high does the tower need to be to fill the
Well,
gap that they've
here
proven the
it
need
is-
for?
Here it is from the parking lot of the site visit. Is the balloon.
Right.
And it's certainly exceedingly high. And I'm only one person, one
Right.
vote. That's my opinion. I think it's too tall, and,
Okay. And you can't see it hardly.
well, of course you can. You showed us the picture that you can see
All
it
right.
from,
Well, okay. I don't mean to argue. I'm going
that's-
to make my presentation. I'm going to make my points.
yep.
I have one question. You could have one of the engineers come up here and tell us if it was lowered to that height, would it give you the coverage, or would it give the town the coverage that it
Would you be
needs?
building the tower?
No.
Thank you.
20 feet above the average tree canopy? No.
well,
That's
no,
an easy
but
call.
Another question, to put it another way, is if you didn't have the tower as high as it is and didn't give the 10 feet at the top to the town and lowered it
10 feet?
10 feet, that's a help. But also, we don't have a contract for other carriers, so we're building in anticipation of other carriers to have it that high. And if the bottom...
These are arguments for the points that we're going to go through. So
All right, well,
let's-
I was just going to say, if the bottom carrier can send out a frequency, then obviously that height right there at 120 or whatever it was, works.
For one carrier.
For
And
one
that's
carrier.
part of the argument we're going to go in probably in these five,
Okay.
some of these five
Right.
All right,
criteria.
I would like those two pictures put.
If your highest slot is at 120, keep it in mind, if the town's at the highest slot, then the next commercial carrier is at 110, which means the next 4 slots down is at 70 feet. And in this topography, 70 feet is going to be pretty much no good for a
Is that-
commercial carrier.
Well,
Is it also fair to say that if the top were at 90 feet, the next tower in is going to want a taller tower or another tower of the same height somewhere else?
I can't give a definitive yes, but yeah, that's why the ordinance clearly wants co-location opportunities on towers. Because you have a number of licensed carriers, all of whom have to be given an opportunity to bring coverage to town, and the lower you go, the worse coverage they get. And you talked about the umbrella of the Federal Telecommunication Act. That comes from, and I cite this case, that's the Daniels case, and that's the New Hampshire Supreme Court saying you have to give a broader interpretation for variance to allow these things, or you're going to have a real problem under federal law. That's it. And I have to tell you, it's a little frustrating to be up here arguing about height when no one from the public has come out to say lower it. No one from the public has come out to say it's too high. You can't see it.
You know, I think that's unfair to keep taking that stance when we've been told and trained and educated
But
to
we've
not-
already argued about
But-
this twice,
but-
so let him just say it and let's just go by it.
Well,
Thank you.
He said
I think
it,
it's
let's go by
very
it.
inappropriate.
Yeah, what
It's
I don't
not
quite
inappropriate.
understand is, you're asking for a 10-foot high variance. What is the 150 that you're allowed? Where's that from?
I'm sorry. I
What is
missed.
your, what height are you permitted that you're asking?
Well, it would be 20 feet above the average tree canopy. And I might add, I guess functionally.
So let me just finish my question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
because
Excuse me,
If he's
Audrey?
allowed 20 feet above the tree canopy, why is the variance for just 10 feet?
It's not. Our
Okay.
variance request is for 160 feet.
Okay, so that extra 10 feet is, where'd that come from?
I believe the denial was based on the definition of alone. The denial was
Definition of a what?
the definition alone, because he asked for 160 feet where the ordinance holds it to the average tree canopy. There was no hard and fast number of, you're asking for 160, where by regulation it's
Okay, so
60.
I came up with this 10 feet out of it, that 10 feet doesn't make any, okay, I got it.
Excuse me, Audrey?
I don't know.
I'm confused because people are saying 10 feet and 20 feet, and the audience says 10 feet above the average tree canopy height.
Okay,
Well, and what I was.
that wasn't the 10 feet I thought we were looking at, but,
Okay.
But what I
You're-
was, what I was trying
you're
to,
right.
what I was trying to tell my board members is that we have, with Bennett Hill, with Camp, whatever the name is, we have used average tree height in New Hampshire canopy at 80 to 90 feet. So let's say 90 feet, give them the benefit of the doubt. 90 feet plus 10, 10, 10, and 10 for 4 carriers. What does that give us? Some
30?
gives 140, 130, and you're asking for 160.
That's correct.
let's find out why.
Thank you. I can't, it's hard for me to speak to the average tree canopy across the state. I'm not aware of that figure. I don't doubt what you say, but that's not what your ordinance says. And so your ordinance says, and Ms. Silk is correct, it's 10 feet above the average tree canopy, and the way you determine average tree canopy is to measure all trees over 20 feet high within a 300-mile radius. So that's where I think where the 10 feet and 20 feet figures come in.
300 feet.
Yeah, that's what.
We caught that.
Did I say 300 feet?
No, you said 300
300
miles.
300 feet, I'm sorry.
Probably not going to help
It's,
you either.
no, that would be a big tree survey. Sorry, it's late. But,
I mean, that makes no sense. What if there were no trees within 300 feet?
well, that's right. And courts have dealt with that issue before, and they've thrown those ordinances out.
Our ordinance says you can't put it in an open field.
Well, in any event, let me address the variance criteria, please. The first two criteria I always take together, and now I am on page 6 of my narrative. The variance will not be contrary to the public interest, and the spirit of the zoning ordinance is observed. The issue is really whether the variance would unduly and in a marked degree conflict with the ordinance such that it violates the ordinance's basic zoning objectives. And the New Hampshire courts have recognized two ways for determining that. One is to determine whether the variance would alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Another approach is to determine whether the granting the ordinance would threaten public health, safety, or welfare. Well, here, in our opinion, even at 160 feet, it's not going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And not to get off on a tangent, Another thing I would take a look at this ordinance, the special exception criteria basically are the variance criteria in different words. And you've already found, and I understand there's a different vote and you have to take the vote, et cetera. I get that. But you can't, there's very limited visual impact. There's no noise, there's no smoke, there's no glare, there's no traffic. You found under the special exception, we're not going to alter the immediate neighborhood. So now the question is, are we going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood? If you give us 160 feet, based on the evidence, is it going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood? Our position is no, for the very reasons we've been talking about all night long. Another approach is to determine whether granting the variance would threaten the public health, safety, or welfare. Well, again, we think the answer to that is pretty clearly no. There's no impact on historical sites. There's no impact on any environmental sites. There's not traffic congestion, etc. And in fact, if you read the police and fire chief letters, it will help the public safety and welfare. So you're closing a significant gap in coverage at 160 feet. You're bringing in coverage that most people, I think at this point in time, concede there's a need for coverage up there. And you're not doing it in a way that's going to impact the neighborhood or threaten the public safety or welfare. And for that reason, we think we meet those two criteria. The third criteria is substantial justice is done by granting the variance. The guiding rule on this factor is that any loss to the individual that is not outweighed by a gain to the general public is an injustice. The correct focus is whether the general public stands to gain from a denial of the variance. Well, here, we don't see any gain to the public by denying this variance. We don't. We see a loss. There's no coverage. The police and fire won't have will still have problems up there. And I would note, when I'm reading these variance criteria, these are coming straight from the court cases. I don't put in the quotations, I don't put in the citations, because then it reads like a legal brief. But these are coming straight from the court decisions. The substantial justice by granting the variance, however, you would be addressing a significant gap in coverage, and you're providing space for 4 carriers. We know T-Mobile's already interested, and so we think substantial justice is done by granting the variance.
Can I ask a question at this?
Sure.
Could you please describe to me, and I see this written in the court cases and so forth, significant gap. What generally do you conjure up as a significant gap besides this one or this one?
I can describe a significant gap in coverage is one that's marked by an inability to obtain or hold a call, dropped calls, dead zones. The courts will look at traffic counts, and I think in our I didn't say this in the RF report, but I think there's a traffic count on that road of over 4,200 vehicles a day. And so there is no hard and fast definition. The courts will look at size, and in my opinion, if you're 2 miles in length, you're looking at a significant gap. They will look at things like traffic count. 4,200 is a pretty good number, if that's the correct number. I'm guessing at it, but I'm pretty sure that's it. And certainly, Route 28 is pretty well traveled. So those are the type of figures or factors that a court will look at to determine whether there's a significant gap in coverage.
Thank you.
And I would note, I didn't talk about a significant gap in coverage in detail because no one's really seemed to be disputing the point that there's not good coverage up there. But we feel that's a significant gap in coverage.
Well, I actually think there was a comment in the last case where the fellow said it's only a 30-second drop, but I think that's when you take that 30 seconds and you multiply it by the number of cars, that becomes more important.
I'm sorry.
It becomes more important.
It's more than a 30-second drop. I live on Pork Hill, and at the bottom of the hill, everything goes dead. And then you turn on 28 South heading into Wolfeboro. You got to go 2 miles down before you start getting a decent signal again.
And if you live up there, it's not a 30-second gap, it's a 24/7 gap. The next one is a literal enforcement of the provisions would result in an unnecessary hardship. And this is where the umbrella comment comes from. It comes from the Daniels case, which I did cite in there because that's a very important case in New Hampshire. Before the Daniels case, it was hard to get a variance for these because, well, it was just very hard. Daniels says, yes, you still have to apply your ordinance. There's no question about it. But the Telecommunication Act is an umbrella over that. And so if you apply your ordinance, but you deny an application for a variance for a significant gap in coverage, you are probably violating the Federal Telecommunication Act. And there are remedies, and I'm just being honest, there are remedies in federal district court for that. Now, and I quote specifically, a broader, more inclusive view of hardship is required under the law. And what they say is, I'm paraphrasing now, but forget the traditional unnecessary hardship application that you guys go through all the time. Yep. What Daniel says is you have to look at whether the proposed location is centrally located within the significant gap, whether it has the correct topography, or is of adequate size to effectively eliminate the gap in coverage. And that's, I didn't put that in quotes, but that language comes pretty much straight from the court case, I can assure you. And so it says, although a parcel of land may be similar to the surrounding properties in terms of its general characteristics, a parcel may still be unique for purposes of hardship when considered in light of the Federal Telecommunication Act. And that was the problem we always ran into before, because we'd come in on a site like this and somebody would say, well, you could put it on the next 73-acre lot right next door, so boom, it's not unique. And we were arguing against that for years until Daniels came out, and Daniels says that's not the criteria used anymore. Is it centrally located in the gap? Does it have the correct topography? And does it have the adequate size, and will it fill that gap? And we think we have all those in spades. I won't bring around the other sheet, but we are centrally located, we have the correct topography, and we fill the gap in coverage. So for that reason, we feel we do have the unnecessary hardship. The last one is the value of surrounding properties are not diminished. Well, again, I think this is a proper, this is clearly the proper element for a variance. I have an issue with ordinances that put this under special exception criteria, which your ordinance does, like many, many other towns do. But having found that we meet the special exception criteria for no diminution of property value, I think the same holds true here. There are very limited views. It's a large property. We observe all the setbacks. There's no impact in terms of traffic, noise, other nuisance factors. And so we feel that there will be no impact or diminution of surrounding property values. I've tried to do those, Madam Chair, as quickly as I could because some of these we've been plowing over now for 2.5 hours. I will say I've been doing this a long time. I am used by a lot of carriers and tower companies, and the reason for that is I'm a zealous advocate for my clients. I hope I did not offend anybody up here. If I do, I apologize. That's not my intent, I assure you. But at the same time, as you can well imagine, when you get up in front of a board for a 160-foot cell tower, things can often get contentious. I'm not going to raise the issue about who's behind me in the audience, but you have to have a backbone to do this type of work, and sometimes I do, and sometimes, well, I always do, but sometimes perhaps I let that govern my comments, and I shouldn't. I certainly meant no disrespect to anybody. I will leave you with one parting thought, or one statement. I'm repeating myself, but with this limited impact, in my humble opinion, it makes no sense to knock this down in height. You don't gain anything, and you lose potential slots and potential coverage, and we think we meet all the criteria. So having said that, I will answer any questions, or otherwise I'll sit down.
Clear?
I'm good. Question?
I think I've beaten my point to death.
Sarah, anything?
No, I just had a question. You listed a few people that want to get on there. What companies do roaming that would, does Verizon do roaming that, because you were talking about this tower will eliminate the need for a bunch of other little towers for other carriers. And are there specific carriers that do roaming to help accommodate low?
I am going to turn that question over to perhaps Peter Cook. I guess I would say all the carriers want coverage.
Right.
They don't want to encourage you to use other networks. And my experience has been when you build a tower, they will come. Verizon very often is ahead of the game because it's big compared to
So
some of the other
Verizon
carriers.
offers roaming?
Well, I'm going to pass that question off, but my point being,
My carrier,
who's your carrier?
when
If you don't
U.S. Cellular.
Okay.
And when I head into town and I dial a number and it won't come up because I don't have enough U.S. Cellular coverage, Verizon pops on and tells you to, redial it with the area code, even if it's a local number. And so I thought that was roaming, but I may not truly understand what roaming is.
I would defer to Peter.
Okay.
'cause I don't-
No problem, no problem.
In this area, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon do not roam on others. So they've determined that there's enough volume here that it's not worth it. For the reasons John had mentioned, is that you have, once a carrier lets you roam, then you are off their network, and they have lost that customer and the minutes of use and so on and so forth. So they'll go through an analysis. So there's some very rural areas where it makes sense. There's just not enough volume there to make the investment to expand your network. In this area, the three big carriers are all away from roaming. They have in the past up in the northern part of the state, parts of Vermont, parts of Maine.
I get
but not here.
excellent U.S. Cellular cover in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. It boggles my mind.
Yeah, yep. And that's what they figured out. Honestly, U.S. Cell is kind of an outlier in terms of their the way they deploy their network. They're more of a regional carrier. They kind of march to their own drummer. So they have traditionally served the northern New England states. Has been a big market for them over the years, but they've been kind of caught and passed by the other carriers at this point. So U.S. Cell would probably be the only one. The other might be Dish, which will roam on, which is basically the Sprint T-Mobile merger. Dish spun off some of their prepay customers. So Dish's network, right now they're building out city-type coverage, and they are roaming. I think they've got a roaming agreement with AT&T, so some of your Dish. And then you'd have other wholesalers that are maybe Walmart has a brand. So there's some private branding ones that do that as well, and they basically always roam. So they basically just wholesale minutes. So if you have another lesser-known carrier, they will roam on networks. But certainly here, the big three all have their own existing networks. So we would expect the challenge we have is T-Mobile has and really all the carriers have interest in expanding, but they're looking now that you get caught in their annual budget and how they design their networks. So T-Mobile knows about this. If it's approved and it goes forward, they will then put it in their build plan probably for next year. And that's really how they put their build plans together. So we as a company will only go forward when we have at least one carrier in hand. And in this particular case, it's Verizon. We fully expect that T-Mobile and probably AT&T, despite what their marketing people might say, we expect them to follow on pretty quickly.
Thank you for that explanation.
So can I close the public hearing? Any other questions for the applicant?
I move to close the public hearing.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Does anybody want to be the forerunner on the 5 criteria?
I'll start with 1 and 2, we usually combine. The variance would not contrary to public interest, the spirit of the ordinance is observed, and as stated by the applicant, where was I? The tower is going to fill a significant gap as demonstrated in the maps. There is poor service in that area, and the allowance of the tower will mirror what's required from the Telecommunication Act, which says to allow for co-location, and this tower will do that. And it does not impede on our ordinance, which allows for towers. And a monopole tower is better than a lattice monopole or a typical tower. So I think the spirit of the ordinance is observed, and not contrary to the public interest. It serves the public interest.
I agree with that. Any other specific comments or?
Yeah, I would just say that I don't think it threatens the public health and safety and welfare, even if it were to topple over. It's so remote from even Evans's homestead that's up there that I think that that's a plus for its locating.
Okay.
I'll do 3.
All righty.
I know some people in North Wolfeboro Road that can't get a cell call from their house. So when you start thinking about safety issues or if there's an emergency and whatnot, this will definitely help people like that. So that's the substantial justice, is bringing other people into the communication world. That's it.
There's no harm, there's not going to be any harm to the general public for the increased height that's being asked for over what the ordinance would allow.
Right.
Are you on number 3?
Yes, I was trying to speak to the substantial justice specifically. So to restrict the height would not be, there's no gain to the general public to restrict the height.
Well, in actuality, as much as I don't like that height, and I stand corrected, it's probably the second or third highest tower, I believe the second highest tower. And however, I have to admit that it serves the public, and that's the gain and no loss to anyone.
Any other comments for number 3 specifically? Okay. 4, an unnecessary hardship. And I want to say that the one sentence in here that really kind of nails this down for me is, this has to be the adequate size to effectively eliminate the gap in coverage. They're the experts that are telling us what size that is that they're asking for. It would make no sense for them to build something that was not adequate. So I think the hardship, in my opinion, the hardship is met for that, for whatever size that they're asking for.
Well, they wouldn't build something that didn't produce for them
Right.
for co-location purposes.
Yep, and that's another big one, is that this does allow other people to co-locate, which will reduce the number of, potentially reduce the number of towers being built. So I think those are two really strong points for, that would go to the unnecessary hardship.
Yep, and the other thing is the uniqueness of the property. And we have had many discussions about how to interpret uniqueness of property. But in this case, as I said previously, we do it a little bit differently because of the Telecommunication Act. And to satisfy the uniqueness factor of an applicant must show that hardship is a result of a specific condition of the property and not the area in general. And we usually use the area in general. So this does have the hardship to the property, and I think that needs to be recorded as such. The hardship is to the property.
Okay, what is the hardship to the property? That it's in the place to provide the adequate coverage?
The hardship to the property is that the site meets the requirements for such an application as we have before us. It doesn't arise from the, it arises from the property and not the individual plight of the landowner.
Any other specific comments about hardship from the board?
Clear.
Well, again, it's important to say that it ensures the compliance with the Telecommunication Act to allow for co-location.
Okay. Property values.
We didn't do that one?
No, it's kind of out of order, but it's okay.
I thought we did.
No, it's number 5.
Can I address that?
Yep.
We don't have any testimony specifically from any experts on that particular topic, but we have none that says that it would be bad, except for the comment about no abatements being asked for tax relief for being in the vicinity of any of the already existing towers.
That's a good point. Any other comments?
I think because in essence, except for the height, the overall site is so protected from visual impact that to the neighbors directly abutting, it will have absolutely no financial diminution of value to those people, most certainly.
It could even be construed that people wishing to move into the neighborhood and finding out they had no cell coverage would find that a disadvantage because so many people are now disengaged from any landline. I know I couldn't live with just my cell phone because I couldn't get an emergency call out.
Do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I would make a motion, and I'd also like to include some conditions.
Why don't you make the main motion first?
Okay. I would move to approve a variance for case number 14V22175-164A, parentheses, 2, height variance for personal wireless facility for GMR Holdings on New Hampshire LLC and Wagon Wheel Trust at 164 Crescent Street, Center Street, tax map 009001, for approval with conditions.
Approval of 160-foot
Oh,
tower.
yeah, approval of a 160-foot monopole tower.
Okay, so
I will,
that's the motion.
I will second that.
Okay. So discussion or amendments?
Yes, amendments. Let's see. I'm going to find Tavis's sheet here. I'm going to work from Tavis's sheet. I got it, thank
Oh,
you.
you got it?
And I'm going to do a little rewording for clarification. He has, I'll just say, number one, all federal, state, and local permits to be received, including but not limited to Town of Wolfeboro building permit approval. And I'd like to add to that, because the applicant has assured us that it's a necessary item, but I would like to specify it to include the environmental assets assessment for the NEPHA report prior to building permit. Just so everybody's on that page. Even though we've been told that he has to.
Right,
I like making it known for all parties.
yes. I generally object to having rubber stamped conditions on variance approvals. So I'll just say that one time.
Okay, you okay with that?
No,
Oh, you're not?
no, I'm not okay with it.
Oh,
But I think you've got a number of them, so.
all right. Number two, all of the documents submitted in the application package by the applicant and any requirements imposed by other agency are part of this approval unless otherwise updated, revised, clarified in some manner. That paragraph, sentence always gives me heartburn. But at any rate, on number two, I'd like to insert specifically application package dated 8/9/22, so that when I get
I
further
agree
down-
with getting the date on the application package or the submittal. That was what we voted on.
That's
So,
what's stated, it's stated on the plan.
So we don't want to include anything that was brought in on the 6th or this evening? That's what the paragraph is getting to.
I didn't hear this question, but
You don't want to include anything that was brought by the applicant to either meeting, only what was brought in on 8/9/22, because that loses your ADK environmental letter, that loses your balloon test, that loses...
well, but
I think that's all part of the application pieces,
I know,
aren't they?
but she just said, with the, instead of referring to the full body of the application, she's made it very specific to the 8/9/22 piece.
So could, Suzanne, could you feel comfortable saying the package dated 8/9/22 and any additional information presented 9/6 and 10/3? That would cover all,
That's
all the stuff we got.
Kind of
Yes.
what the paragraph already
I'll
says.
accept that
Fine.
amendment.
Okay.
Well, are we gonna vote on these one at a time or as a group? Well,
What's your
I'm
preference?
gonna make a motion to not accept number one.
Okay. I can live with that.
Does anybody want to second that?
Second.
What was your motion?
I would making a motion to not accept the first amendment she made about all the documents included,
The environmental study.
plus the standard language that's always there.
So what she's saying is leave number one alone.
I agree. I agree.
All in favor of
Aye.
leaving it off?
She said leaving number one alone. You said taking number one out. Which are we voting on?
I made a motion to take it out.
I know.
So,
We didn't vote to leave it in. You're just going to make a motion to leave number one as is unamended.
No, I'm making a motion to leave it off completely.
Oh.
so you want to drop the standard
No,
number
no, no,
one?
no,
Yes, I do want to drop the
Oh,
standard
no
number
way.
one.
No.
Sorry.
Okay, did anybody second that?
Luke did.
Did you understand what I was doing?
I did.
Okay, all in favor of dropping number 1?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
No.
Now we're to number 2 that had the additions that
Okay.
were brought in.
It would be the package was brought in on 8/9/22, and Sarah suggested and added materials of our 2 meeting dates of what?
9/6 and 10/3.
All in favor of that? Did anybody second that amendment?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 3, the application as submitted does not satisfy the submittal requirements for a building permit.
I make a motion to leave that off.
I'll second that.
All right, then you maybe like the one I have along those lines. Call a vote.
All in favor?
No, well, you got a second.
Yep, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
No.
Got that?
Number 4, notice of decision shall be recorded at the Carroll County Registry of Deeds, and the applicant shall be responsible for payment of recording. I don't see any problem
I
with
want to
that.
keep that. I don't know if is that listed anywhere else, or is that just in the conditions? Is that like a town policy?
It's written in the ordinance.
It's written in the ordinance.
Most of the things that you're voting to not put on are already in the ordinance, but most people aren't aware of them because that's why they've been used as you say,
Right.
rubber stamp.
Well, it's in the applicant's best interest to record it.
Oh, I agree with recording it. I'm
I
not
think the
sure I
applicants-
record, I don't agree with repeating all this language. If they need an information sheet, then they should get an information sheet.
You know, Audrey,
I know we disagree on this.
no,
That's
no,
fine.
not that we disagree. What I'm saying is, there's a reason that these things get in there, because this paperwork travels from one department to another department, to another board, to another committee, and over years, nobody knows what's going on.
Well,
If you
maybe
put
that's
it
the
in your
problem.
notice, if you put it in, yeah, it's a problem. If you put it in your notice of approval, then you've got it.
Well, it's in the ordinance. We've got it.
Well, there's
I
a lot of
understand what
things,
you're
there's
saying,
a lot of
but
things in the
I
ordinance that
think
never
I
happen.
like making things lean when possible.
But then sometimes, to make sure that there are no questions later on, sometimes you do need to reiterate something important. And I think that the fact that the decision should be recorded is pretty important.
Well, my point is, why can't that be reiterated, not in a motion, in a variance? It can be
What harm
reiterated
does
through
it do to
paperwork.
put it in as a motion, Audrey? What harm?
Because it creates a lot of extraneous language. I think that if you're going to make something to change the variance, it should be specific to that variance.
It
And
isn't changing
basically-
it, it's just a
I
condition.
know. In my opinion, conditions of variances should change the variance specifically and not a lot of
Procedural.
language that's procedural. That's just my feeling.
Well,
It's 14 lines in
I
total
don't know if
that he
tonight's the time to
suggested.
change it. I think that needs to be worked on in-house.
We've already decided we disagree, so at an open
All right,
meeting
then
where
call
we
a
vote
vote.
would be the place to do it. So I make a motion to leave that off of the.
Second.
Which one are we on?
The recording.
4.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No,
No,
it's 2 lines. I don't see the harm.
What just happened?
We
You
just
took a
voted
motion-
Four's
to
gone.
take the condition
Yeah.
off,
4.
number 4.
4 is gone, yeah.
The same vote before. Got it.
Next one.
Motion was Audrey and second was,
Tim.
number 5.
Yep.
The variance shall be valid if exercised in 2 years from the date of the final approval or further extended by local ordinance by the zoning board or adjustment for good cause.
And
That's
that's
an
an
important
RSA.
one.
That's an RSA, and I motion to remove that from the conditions.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Okay, So now we'll get to some substance. That should be up your alley.
There you go.
Number 6, the monopole shall not be lit. The monopole shall not be lit.
I'll second for discussion.
They said it wouldn't be. I don't mind putting it in there.
I thought they said something like if it's under 200 feet, it doesn't have to be lit.
It doesn't have to be lit, but they said it wouldn't be lit.
And this goes to the building department. And, you know, he's going to have his hands full. It'd be nice to have some direction from.
But we're not the building department.
We're
Isn't it-
giving direction in our approval. He'll get a copy of this, I would assume.
When this goes to the building department, Tavis, do they have the right to say light it or not light it at that point?
The planning board's going to address that
I
as well.
suppose theoretically, they could put together an application
But we
package that
can-
had 2 spotlights going up, but I don't think,
We can put reasonable conditions on.
I'm not questioning that. He just asked me a question. Could they
Procedural.
propose a lit pole? And yes, procedurally, they could. I don't know if the board discussed that one way or the other than the applicant saying it wasn't going to
Well,
be
the thing
lit.
of it is, if they should come back for some purpose to heighten it, then we'll have that discussion. But right now, there was concern about aviation and stuff like that, and they said it wouldn't be lit. The only lighting would be on the cabinets. So I think it's prudent to put in here, the monopole, as a condition, shall not be lit.
So you're
That's a motion.
a motion. Second?
Yes, sir. Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. The monopole shall, and I've taken some of this from your Daniels case. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And so I'm not making this out of the blue. It comes from, yeah, I guess it's called the Daniels case. Daniels versus somebody. And they wanted to make sure that
So why don't you tell us what
they
your...
wanted to, because he raised his hand.
Well, because Kate left, I was just doing math.
She's not sitting.
Yes.
Still got to write it down and make sure you
Yeah,
have a quorum.
The monopole shall not exceed 160 feet per plan of per plan Z5, I hope I get the right plan, on 7/26/22, on that plan. The plan of 7/26/22, Plan Z5.
Okay.
Second.
Well, was it, before you do that, wasn't the 160 feet mentioned in the original motion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we repeating it again?
Yeah, I
No, she's
can't
just
hear
saying
you
what
without the
plan she's
microphone.
basing it on.
So it was seconded and all in favor, yes.
Aye.
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 No.
Thanks, Tim.
Number 8, well, actually, Tavis, I'm sorry, these numbers won't be that way because we've taken a couple out.
Oh, no, I'm just trying to keep up with you. Keep going.
Okay, you can just give them a bullet. Monopole to be located on-site as shown on Plan Z4 and Z5, Plan of 7/26/22.
So didn't we already reference the stuff that was submitted
Application.
on that site plan? I mean, wasn't that the first one that we did? That we allowed, number 2? All the documents submitted were part of the approval?
To that point, you approved a use and a height. I don't think you have any dictation over which plan they do it.
I think that we approved the exact plan. If they moved it
That
100
might
feet
be
one
a
way or the
substance
other,
of-
I think that would be an
might be a
issue.
substance of a future question. But
Right.
assuming they've already applied for what they want to build.
I'll second this one too.
Okay, all in favor?
Wait, did you say keep it or get rid of it?
Aye.
Oh,
rid of it.
she's adding everything. No, this is all new.
No.
Add back. No,
Yes.
that's
Yes?
3
Yes.
yeses and 2 nos.
No.
3 yeses, 2 noes.
Okay. All right. And this one again is from the legal case. The existing tree canopy around and outside the compound and area shown on the plan shall be preserved for the length of the lease.
We didn't discuss that at all.
We talked about tree
Does
canopy.
the planning board address future use of the existing or future trees? That seems like a big black hole.
I think on the site walk, it was brought up, and they brought up the fact that they placed it where they did because they wouldn't need to disturb any trees in the course of construction or managing it.
So in another scenario, what if, like, the trees grew?
Well, that's
a great point.
What it's saying is you can't take them down to expose. It preserves, if they grew, that supposedly the tower's high enough to be above the canopy. That's the argument we heard.
No, that's an interesting question. Why isn't that one of the planning board things?
The planning board might consider it, but I guess the question is, all the trees?
No, I said around,
In the 300-foot area?
no.
The first row, the first 2 rows, the first 20 feet, the first 50 feet? I mean, I don't think the applicant has the ability to forestall any further development of the property because there's a tower on it.
Well, I think in some scenarios you might want that. I don't think it's germane.
Well,
here,
is
but
is
it's a
this
good
an
question.
attempt to keep them from clear cutting around the tower?
That's
Is that
the
what it
idea
is?
of it. I wish I
Well,
could
then why
find
don't you make it short and sweet and just say, they can't clear cut within so many feet?
Well,
I think there
then
are
let-
trees within a certain number of feet,
Then
right?
let's reword it, that you shall not clear cut around the compound
I
area.
wasn't, I didn't make it up to the tower. Luke, what else did you remember about that?
Well, here's the
conversation?
picture, Sarah.
There aren't many
I
trees.
don't need the picture.
The
I'm asking about
conversation-
what somebody said.
The conversation came up with the immediate growth around there because it was very close to, it's closer to the backdrop of trees that block it from the home view. And the conversation came up, and to my recollection, they picked that spot. Well, for one of the reasons was they didn't need to remove any vegetation. And the vegetation that was there provided a natural cover to the residents that it was directly abutting the Evans property, so.
I'd like to make a motion to leave that off.
Well,
can't hear
it wasn't
you.
even the full motion to get it on.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what we're putting on yet, but if you get it off, then you don't put on anything.
That's correct.
What you're saying. I think it's something that needs to be considered on maybe some other installations. But frankly, in this one, I don't think that that's going to be a public issue at all.
But isn't the application for 100 foot by 100 feet? That's what he's asking for. What goes on outside of that, he's the property owner. If he wants to cut his trees down, he has every right to do so.
Yet our ordinance has a 300-foot area that they're looking at the tree canopy.
To determine height.
So if the trees aren't there, the tree
Might-
canopy on that piece of property is not within 300 feet.
Well, an interesting discussion would be if the site were clear cut, would you still need a 160-foot tower? Yes, no.
Based
That
upon what
wasn't
they told
asked.
us, I
Based
think
on
the
what they
answer is
said, that's still a yes. But that wasn't discussed. So I'm not,
I think
kind of
it's-
agree with the chair. I don't think you set the groundwork for the
I think
addition.
it's something that needs to be looked into, but I would make a motion to leave any language like that off in this instance.
I'll second that.
All in favor of leaving it off?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
No?
Aye.
Okay, and the last one. The granting of the special assessment and variance, and maybe, since we're on the variance, maybe we have to just say variance, shall be conditioned upon planning board approval. Now, we happen to know they're going tomorrow night, but if something happens, they can't go tomorrow night.
I'd like to be heard on this. Don't do this. You can't, you can't do that. You
I
guys
think he's
deny-
right.
Yeah, you guys choose the variance. You can't make it subject to planning board saying yes or no.
We can't make it subject to getting a shoreline permit or anything else.
Right.
NEPA approval,
Right.
FCC clearance.
I didn't make it up, I took it from something.
You can say we have to go get site plan approval, but you can't make our variance contingent
Contingent, yeah.
upon
Right.
the planning board saying we agree with the variance.
Okay, so with that discussion,
I mean,
I
I make a motion not to make that amendment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, aye.
So who voted?
So we're back to the main motion.
Well,
Everybody voted yes.
Use the microphone.
everyone voted yes to not do what you just suggested saying,
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Tavis.
We're back to the main motion.
but not quite. Just
Okay.
for clarity and my sanity, the only conditions remaining are to change the existing number 2 to refer to plans dated 8/9/22 or information received 9/6 or 10/3 at public hearing.
Yep,
Monopole shall not be lit.
yep,
Monopole shall not exceed 160 feet per plan 7/6/22.
yep.
That's it. Okay.
Yep.
So now,
So, back
with
to the main
those,
motion.
back to the original motion
It was moved to approve the variance and
by
seconded.
Brian and seconded by Silk.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sarah?
I said aye.
Oh, you did?
Thanks.
One more. What's the
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good job, people.